Alright, so you guys wanted a statement from me, eh? Well, if you're seeing this video pop up on your feed, then that means Lio finally addressed his stuff, and I feel comfortable enough to speak on this very exhausting situation that has been unfolding the past 2 months. Links to his video, as well as a few other relevant videos down in the description below. It's been a particularly tough time, and I know that many of my audience has grown impatient of me or has just jumped ship thinking that I'm some big abuse apologist. And while I'm not okay with the insinuation, I am okay with people dipping, because frankly, if they're not willing to respect my wishes and waiting for the other side of two friends fighting to come out, then they're fair weather anyway. I hope they're living their best life, honestly. But like, do you realize how much I've had to parse through? Like, when I say allegations were gish-galloped against Lio, I meant it. I had to help weed through the entirety of the Senate's history, Lio's other personal chat, the Book of Omens. I went through Lio's personal DMs, his fucking text messages. We weeded through tons of recorded voice calls and a couple of live streams even, and none of that is even touching on the Fruitcake Club, which was a drama that was obviously supposed to coincide with everything Lio was going through. I talked with a few people involved in all of that, plus weeded through the entirety of exported logs myself, along with 2 other Senate members, keeping a spreadsheet on hand to catalog and organize who all did what and when. I went full-on investigator in this situation because I wanted to be as thorough as I humanly could be. And you know what? With everything that I had parsed through, I bet there are still things that I'm missing in all of this. But I have tried my best, and despite the constant calls from the opposition claiming that I'm some liar or manipulator, or that I'm some walking red flag, I don't tend to tell you guys things that I don't genuinely believe, and I'll try to have evidence to back it up. Though, I do feel as if nobody is going to believe me regardless, and we'll get into that a little later. So if you've been under a rock and aren't sure what's going on, for starters, I envy you. But secondly, there were allegations against a friend of mine by the name of Lio Convoy, specifically created by those who he once claimed were a part of his found family. These individuals, for the sake of ease, went by the names Pink, or Jay, Jordan, Opal, and Aaron, the latter of whom you may have previously known as Hopeless Peaches. These 4 have come out with a variety of allegations against Lio, predominantly relating to abuse, except Opal. They just talked about the pornography made of Lio and his family, which... weird, but okay. But the other 3 absolutely did, especially Aaron, who on March 18th had an ex-Senate mod by the name of Lumitro Art drop a couple of Google documents that made even further scathing allegations against Lio, and that really tore everything up and affected as many people as it could. We'll get more into that a little later. Shit went wild with people accusing Lio and his friends of being terrible people. Talks about how the Senate chat Lio runs is a fucking trash heap. And good God, the paranoia surrounding everyone really amped up, especially against Lio, frankly without a single care as to how much this whole ordeal would affect the actual victims that Lio has helped. I wasn't happy, but I couldn't exactly say anything because of how much I knew behind the scenes. I already had helped Lio parse through the fruitcake logs that were used to allegedly claim Aaron as a groomer, and I want to stress allegedly, we will also come back to that. I had already helped with a rough draft of Lio's notes addressing the Pink allegations before the earliest draft got leaked to the public. Aaron and Lumi both knew this fact. They knew that I was involved, especially after I had just released a video going to bat for Senate mere days before their big reveals, and they both should have and probably were very well aware that eyes were on me, and I was caught in the crossfire with no warning. To say I feel a bit betrayed is perhaps too under of a statement, but whatever. It's not the first time I was backstabbed in the way that had me question how honest my own friends were being to me. Hi 2017, how are you? However, because of this betrayal, I was just driven further in my resolve to help Lio get his story and facts straight to address everything. I didn't write the script for him or anything, so let's skip that off the table. I merely gave him notes on what he should be addressing and helped him in researching and gathering as much evidence as he needs. Again, his statement is down below. I have no idea when all of this will come out. Lio's is the only one that I am requiring to be out by the time that this one does, but I do hope the others follow suit in pretty close succession, and I will add links once those videos come out. Now, with this said, there's still a lot to talk about, quite a few people to address, so let's start with the old man. Contrary to the popular belief, I only really started hanging around in Senate beyond the few gallery calls I was called to in there at the turning point of 2024. I just figured I'd get that one out there for you all that think that I'm some big Senate dweller, because there's been a few of you and I do feel the need to address you. But furthermore, also contrary to the popular belief, I also never once said that Lio doesn't have shit to address. I agreed with some of the criticisms in Brooke the Dragon Dog's video, and I had even agreed to some of the criticisms from the Fox Mafia prior. Lio is not a perfect individual, and there are definitely very valid criticisms, especially in regards to how he approaches situations, how he thinks about certain situations prior, and how he treats others. I don't think he's abusive, at least not towards those who he cares about, but he does still have a lot to learn in regards to conflict resolution and how to approach those with mental health problems. During this whole ordeal, I have had many conversations with the guy about critique, how to address and assess arguments and evidence. I've talked to him about his persistent reliance on insults and when it's okay to use them in counter-arguments. I have also prior, when covering the Neora Plays stuff, told him that going around calling people zoophiles and pedophiles without having that evidence on standby is also maybe a bit too libelous, and that he should be careful when he throws those kinds of allegations around. But with all this said and done, I've personally seen him try to learn and try to change, even if he can be a bit stubborn from time to time. I can't exactly get too onto his case for that though, because I'm very similar. We're a bit stubborn at first, but we get there eventually. It takes patience. And as you guys like to tell me, I apparently have a lot of that, but some of y'all have shown me you don't like that fact. I like to encourage growth and change on my channel, obviously. It's learning from my mistakes that I was even in the position that I was in before all of this stuff went down. Retrospection and introspection are both really recurring themes on my channel, no matter how big or small, and that's always been there. It's been the case for a very, very long time. But given the reception on my Brooke the Dragon Dog video, it seems people are very quick to forget that. I don't do videos to cancel people. I don't tend to tell people to get offline unless it seems like the online space is genuinely unhealthy for them, i.e. Neko Coda. And maybe you feel Lio is amongst that list, but I don't agree. Because as I said in the Brooke video, I have seen changes amidst the Senate myself firsthand. That's not a lie, Brooke. That's not me running damage control for Lio. That is my own personal experience with Lio and the chat itself. And as viewers of mine, you should have been able to notice that change between the Neora video and the Brooke video, because how I talk about Senate in both of those videos is night and day. But, you know, you don't need to take my word on it. Lumi and Aaron, who both were ones releasing docs about how the Senate never changed unless it was their doing, both acknowledged changes themselves. So did the previous moderators, who, by their own admission, left the Senate because they couldn't continue bullying people. Also, the Who Changed Senate not only doesn't matter because it shows changes existed either way, but it's also a fat fucking lie because we have logs showing that Lio was the one trying to implement changes into the server alongside those in his now ex-mod staff. The only reason these people are claiming there was no change in the Senate now is because they were able to throw Lio under the bus for being a little annoyed by miscommunication during a call of bad judgment. While yes, the Raven Pines call got a bit ableist, I'm not going to deny that, there is far much more to that situation than really anyone is acknowledging. Lumi, Aaron, and K Cosmic in their documents used that call to talk about how much Lio hadn't changed from the Rosa Ray Ramsey situation. But, and I'm going to link my video about the full calls down below so you can see it for yourself, that notion is just untrue. What actually happened was that Lio was trying to make sure he didn't repeat the Rosa call, and was asking questions that could relate to how much Raven could understand or do on her own accord, so he knew exactly how stern to be with her. Rosa, if I'm not mistaken, had a handler, and everyone went far more rough with her to the point it devolved into straight-up bullying. But in the Raven call, that didn't happen. Lio instead overcorrected his behavior and asked questions that were far more intrusive with ableist implications. And we can tell he was overcorrecting because, as I found out while scripting this statement, hence why this piece of info isn't in the Raven Pines video, but literally a day prior to the Raven call, Peaches was grilling him over the Rosa Ray Ramsey stuff, alongside some other examples, showing that these two were being pressed over it to some degree.
We got like 4 hours until the conundrum call anyways, it shouldn't take that long.
Yep. Exactly. No, you know me. If I see a gallery call start going on to the hour mark, I pop my head and go, why the fuck is this still going?
Yeah. Here.
You're not going to do it on this one. You're going to stay out of this one.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
this one's
because you have stated in the moderation chat, and I am holding you to it, that if it's a serious matter, you're not going to be involved. So you're not going to be involved.
Okay, but
Aaron,
pinky promise.
I'm not promising you it's not going to take a while. No, I'm not doing
Hold
that,
on,
Aaron.
Lio.
I'm not.
Lio, let him cook. Let him cook. He might be telling you something else.
Yeah, exactly, because I am telling you something else, dipshit. Pinky promise that it's not going to be devolving into fucking, insulting this person. Lay down what your issues are and then make them fuck off. Like,
Aaron,
yeah?
can you number one, can you stop insulting me every time you talk to me?
Okay, no problem.
And two, I'm 38. I'm not a little kid. It's not going to be just going in there and doing a repeat of the Rosa call. Okay, I haven't done that in over a year.
The Rat King call was that.
No, that wasn't even what the Rat King call was, and you flat out told me I was too soft on the guy.
I wasn't. No, I said that he was still here, and that's cringe.
That call wasn't just sitting there insulting. That was mostly letting Zach figure out how to navigate around a call like that because the first time he ever did it.
Yeah, but I'm also saying that it has been either me or Lumi who are usually the ones who get the call back on track. If you're doing it as just you on your own, I'm not babying you. I'm saying flatly that it usually turns into insulting, especially considering that, like, you do insult people. And if this person is running to Enler about stuff, it's gonna very easily, because, again, it's been proven very easily there to wrap you around their little finger and make an example out of you, not the other way round. And going in, and this is why I have an issue, you saying, like, oh, I'm gonna make an example out of him, 9 times out of 10, it's you being made the example out of. And I want you to be cognizant of that when you go into calls.
That is not even accurate. Where are you getting that from? It's me being made an example out of. How?
Yes. You sat... Okay. Fine. Okay. You have been in a few calls, not just the Rosa call, where you go in and you insult people. There's times where you start asking questions that come off as offensive. There are times where you literally sit there and start taking the piss out of hyperfixations and think that liking Star Wars is the same as to be able to defend predators, a la today. That's why I say be
That wasn't what I
cognizant
was
of what you
doing
say.
there. That is not what I did there. I just explained to you what I did there. And can you even bring up a recent example of me doing any of the problematic behaviors you just listed?
Maya,
Yeah, you...
take a second.
Because the problem is that recently you've started to be, like, aggressive with people again. And a lot of the time, right, you say that you're gonna make an example out of somebody, and if these people were smarter, because I have seen all your actions, they could actually point to, you being aggressive. They're not, and they're really dumb, and you're going up against really dumb people. But if I wanted to make an example, I could pull out a good few things. And, like, the point is that if you've got a gallery call, when you're by yourself, usually, it starts falling into insults. The Rat King call was put back on track because Hidden joined. And it's not me saying that it's going to be the same as the Rosa call. It's me saying that you jump in and are aggressive and overly insulting for what's needed.
And I asked you, what are some recent examples of this problematic behavior?
The Rat King call turned
The
into
Rat King
insults.
call, you literally told me that I was too soft on him in the call.
When?
And you literally went into that call because it was getting long on a tooth, and you told me in front of everybody that I was being too soft on him.
No, I'm pretty sure I was saying that it was going way too long and it was going really silly.
Yes, you did have complaints about the length, but you literally verbatim said I was being too soft on him.
I don't remember this.
I'll have a go. I'll have a fun time. But I'm just finding it so funny that you're coming in here trying to act tough all the fucking time. And honestly, honestly, Hidden was right. Like, how long has this been going on? I can't tell. It's been too long. Lio, you giving him too much slack. Zach's slaying, so like, who fucking knows what happened?
It's also worth saying that the ableism in the Raven Call obviously wasn't deliberate like it was in the Rosa Call, where people very casually just called her the R slur. The worst Lio did in the Raven Call was get a little too invasive. These are not in the slightest the same situations, and I'm very tired of people misconstruing them to be one of the same. Weaponizing the Raven Call in this way also just generally misunderstands the problem with the ableism within the Rosa Call. While ableism isn't great regardless, the problem that people like Ponder, Skritus, and Harley had with the Rosa Call was the rampant bullying and ad hominem attacks, because that can lead to the one being criticized to further victimize themselves.
Admittedly, I haven't been here for very long, so I didn't hear the start of the conversation, but I do need to ask, do you guys actually think that the throwing of insults and blatant, like, I'm not even gonna get, like, sugarcoated, this is bullying. Do you really think that this is helping? Or do you think that this is just gonna make Rose feel like she's the victim in this situation? Do you
I don't know, I think
she's
it's
going to
funny.
maybe victimize herself because you are actively bullying her and apparently have been doing it for 4 hours?
Well, we haven't been doing it for 4 hours. Blue actually had the call
Apparently
for
the
the
call's
past
been
2
going on
hours.
for 4 hours.
The call has, yes.
And
But at this point,
this shit been going on throughout the whole fucking call?
no.
Because, like, I haven't been listening very long, and I'm really, really disappointed with what I've been hearing. Like, I'm not defending Rosa at all. I don't really know much about what she's done, aside from, like, she was dismissing someone being a predator. But, like, what the fuck prompted all this bullshit? But that my point still stands. Do you honestly think that all of the ad hominems and active bullying, because that is what this is helping the situation?
Yeah, I can't help but agree
Or
with Panda.
do you think that maybe Rosa's just gonna view this experience as a means of victimizing herself? Because you are all actively bullying her, so turning her into a victim in her own mind.
Yeah, but I mean, screaming insults at her doesn't help, right? Like, jumping in a call and being like, you're fat or whatever, that doesn't help the argument, right? You only serve to make that person feel like the victim. You serve to, like, I get being angry with them, right? Like, I understand that it's obvious this person's done things wrong, but I feel like going in and verbally berating them does nothing more than feed you guys' personal feelings and emotions and, like, venting. And, like, I get venting, but this doesn't feel healthy or productive in any way.
Is everybody familiar with what belief perseverance is, or what the backfire effect is?
I believe you're about to explain it.
Okay, yeah. So, for those who don't, it essentially means that if you come from a place of confrontation and debunking and trying to present evidence, or even just in a way that is confrontational to somebody you're trying to convince, it has the exact opposite effect, and instead they will reinforce those beliefs even
so that's
deeper
the
than
term
before.
for what I was referring to. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I see.
Once again, you can see it in the full Raven calls. Rampant insults and ad hominem attacks don't happen. So I think it's excruciatingly disingenuous of those who are framing them as one of the same. Aaron also in this document claims that Lio goes into the discussion surrounding Raven aggressive, when that's just also untrue. Now, I know there were the following post-Raven calls where Lio vents his frustrations about how that call went to both the rest of the mod staff and directly to Aaron himself, but I have a problem with that framing too. While yes, it kinda does become worth noting that Lio does tell his mod staff to mute him if he's going too far, only to then get angry when it actually happened, you have to realize the situation was a lot more messy than Aaron specifically wants to paint it. Lio says that Aaron could have hopped into Lio's DMs first to tell him to back off, but Aaron falls back on this idea of he said it in the sidebar chat, exactly where he knows Lio cannot see when he's on his mobile account. This mostly comes down to miscommunication on their part, and while some of the stuff that Lio says in the midst of frustration isn't exactly okay, like he does accidentally insinuate that he doesn't believe Raven's diagnosis in that call, which, if I have to explain why that's yikes, then it's frankly too late for you. It appears to be Aaron's cornering him that I could see as leading Lio into some of his worst statements he made in that call, which, yes, I am fully aware can itself be a critique on how the Senate operates. The potential for irony is not lost on me. But if you do find the irony in that, then it shouldn't be much to say that if it's not okay when the Senate backs people into a corner, why are we then cheering it on when it happens to Lio? Is it merely the comeuppance of it all? Possibly. But when parsing through the allegations and evidence about everything, the constant appeals to emotion and bad faith uncharitable reads are particularly frustrating. Like, here, where Aaron disregards the situation they clearly show they have no knowledge of. It wasn't that Raven didn't call out predatory behavior in a server they didn't moderate. It was the fact Raven knew children were doing live streams with a predator and joined in on them instead of trying to get the children to not do so. She didn't tell anyone these children were doing this. She did nothing but watch the fireworks because by her own words, she wanted to dunk on the predator herself. She was in it for the entertainment value.
Again, I don't entirely know what was discussed in this stream, so like... I just want to mainly know where your priorities were. Like, were you there more for entertainment, or like, did you... Well, we already established that you did nothing.
Yeah.
Was that a yes to my question?
Yeah, that was a yes.
So you're there for entertainment.
It also wasn't just reading lines for predator callouts. Raven was also caught talking about an inappropriate ecchi anime to children and turning the opposite way when two other SCC members recommended them to children. Raven was caught checking scripts for kids when they talked about NSFW topics. Raven tried to get 3 other minors to do a video together to talk about known lolicon Carmen Rider. Aaron, of course, doesn't know this, nor do they really care, given they have previously called the SCC oversensitive in the past. So I don't expect them to be correct about situations they hold 0 interest in. But to therein use that situation as leverage against Lio, to call him dishonestly framing an irresponsible person who admitted to being so willingly as malicious, is only trying to further paint Lio in a particularly bad light for little gain. Or here, where Aaron strawmans Lio by trying to say that he's justifying the actions done in the Rosa Ray Ramsey call, when the message on screen says otherwise.
Aaron is stressed and gun-shy because of the Rosa call circulating. So he has been overcorrecting, and he has been needling me and micromanaging everything I say and do publicly for the past few days now. It's why I was accused of defending the Rosa call when my text literally said the exact opposite, and accused of ableism, because Aaron is overcorrecting.
Literally, in the Discord message, Lio says there is no justifying the way Rosa was treated in the call, but explains why people were angry, something that was justified, even to the person who Lio was talking to. For clarity, the actions are not justified, but the emotions were, which is a distinction that Aaron here does not wish to distinguish for the sake of continuing to make this point that Lio in some way does not feel remorse over the Rosa call, or otherwise is not trying to take accountability for the actions taken within that call, which Aaron, and especially Lumi, both know is incorrect. There's also a point in the call where Aaron gets angry at Lio for calling the situation a game of telephone, saying that because the call was recorded, it couldn't have been a game of telephone. But earlier in that very call, Aaron claims to have not heard the recording.
I told them I would speak to you about it.
Yeah, but like...
You heard that I would talk to you about it.
Yeah, but like, they also want to know, like, why I do things.
No one took a single issue with it.
But why?
So it wasn't to come see why you did something. It was pretty obvious why you did it. Which is why it was defended in the call, as you heard.
Well, I didn't...
And I told you, because if you've heard that call... Go ahead.
I didn't hear the call.
You literally told Leah that you heard it. But did you hear a call or not?
No, I heard what was going on from people, and then I knew that it was recorded.
So Aaron, within this one call, claims that they didn't hear the call outright, but then later insinuates that because the call was recorded, that they knew what was going on in the call. So either Aaron doesn't know what a game of telephone is, or they are lying in this call. And while I'm not really a fan of calling people liars outright, personally I am kind of leaning on believing the latter, because Christ alive, Tippy's lies are more believable. I also noticed that those post-Raven Senate calls are particularly edited, but done so in a way that we don't know the full context of conversation. Not only do we hear none of the conversation prior to Lio's string of questioning, but we also have pretty jarring cuts thrown in there, like this one.
Okay, but just for a second, I just want to bring this up because I think it's important. The reason that these questions were stopped, because we all understand the intention, that's not the problem. The intention was you wanted to figure out how much their autism is affecting their ability to make decisions. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Like, the baseline of those questions are absolutely okay. The problem is, the further you went on, you started asking questions that have incredibly bad implications.
Use a different mic.
I'm fucking tired. We're using my phone speaker, whatever.
That works. Go for it.
I'm not even sure why there's a cut here. Initially, I was going to give some benefit of doubt and assume that it was because Hidden outlined what the questions were and why they were ableist, but literally as the call continues, Hidden does that anyway, so I have no idea what I could give as a benefit of doubt. Plus, you also have this cut from the second of the post-Raven calls, which is particularly interesting.
Aaron, you've got to stop ascribing that level of intent that was never stated. Or, like earlier, when we were having another conversation, and you kept repeating it over and over and over again there too. It's not spaced out.
See, Aaron wants to make the claim that Lio would abuse the fact they regress, but when faced with the possibility of proving that to us within the first post-Raven call between the two of them, they cut out the part of them supposedly regressing. How are we supposed to believe Lio becomes abusive when Aaron regresses? A point they make pretty clear in the document when it's never actually proven to us within the same document. Furthermore, I have seen how Lio treats Aaron when they're regressing, via the direct messages they have. Lio, instead of yelling and abusing them like he's so clearly alleged to be doing behind the scenes, he talks to them instead like he would a child. So if we're supposed to believe Aaron is regressed throughout the whole call with Lio, frankly, I'm not sure myself, it doesn't read in my personal understanding as such, but I guess it's possible, then this would therein be an isolated incident, whereas we have verifiable evidence of the complete converse to that sentiment elsewhere. Hell, we even have verifiable evidence dissuading this allegation within the call itself.
Alright, I feel you're kind of spacing out on me. Are you okay?
Yeah. But the stuff with Jay and Jordan coming out and them saying stuff, it makes me remember more stuff about us arguing. Well, not arguing, but like, you know, like you shouting at me and stuff. And
Okay. Well,
it makes me more anxious talking to you. But then you get mad at me when, like, I am, but I'm trying to explain myself.
okay. Well, I appreciate you giving me that context. So, my first question, non-derogatory here, I want to make that clear, is why would you even pay attention to what Jay and Jordan are saying right now?
No, it's because it was brought up at all and it's stressful and then it reminds me of that and then I get stressed out.
Okay. When was it brought up?
I don't remember.
Because nobody's brought that up to me today.
I know, it's been on my mind a while.
It's been on mine too. And that's probably one reason why I've been on edge, because it does bother me and I just honestly don't know how to deal with it.
Lio observably realizes Aaron is not doing so well and lowers his volume and changes his approach, something that Aaron acknowledges but spins as Lio manipulating the conversation to get Aaron in a more docile state. So when he's frustrated and angry, he's abusive and using Aaron's triggers against him, but when he's calm, he's being manipulative? When he's clearly trying to change from the Rosa call, it's only because of Aaron, but when he slips up in the opposite direction, that shows that there was no change? There's frankly no winning for Lio with Aaron here. Every piece of text in these calls and just how they are framed are supposed to read the absolute least charitable read into Lio's intentions, while getting angry when he feels like others may have had bad intentions towards him. It's so infuriating to me that some people started running with these allegations to call Lio the bad person here, when it's clear as day that Peaches is incredibly manipulative and dishonest throughout the whole call. And mind you, that is just in the 2 calls. There's also that third one.
It's.
I'm sorry, but it wasn't an assumption. She did previously, both in the call we had beforehand and twice before I started even talking about the driving thing.
Yes.
It wasn't an
but
assumption.
She was there to have a civil discussion about it. And if she says that she can't remember, I can believe that. Because if you're trying to if you're having to explain to her why the action was bad in the first place, obviously it wasn't notable enough for her to remember every instance.
That's a disconnect that I don't understand, and hopefully you can walk me through that, because it's pretty clear to me that she does see that it was a problem.
Not to that
And
extent.
she did.
Like, because you had to explain what the problem was, and on top of that, like, you've ignored my memory issues a lot, and you assume that everyone's lying, and also on top of that, asking people if they can drive is irrelevant, and then asking about the specific diagnoses and stuff, and then trying to weed it out of them. Like, you've asked the question, and you need to move on from it. And me saying that isn't me just sat there going like, oh, let me just show up Lio, which also is offensive because you sat there going like, oh, that I'm just gun shy because of the Rosa call. When I've been putting in place these same rules since the Rosa call, and it makes me feel fucking annoyed when you keep acting like I'm only upset about it now, and I'm overcorrecting, and that I'm gun shy about it, and that like I'm just trying to make myself look good.
I didn't say you're trying to make yourself look good.
You said that
and
I
I'm
was
not referring
literally
to...
embellishing how I disagree with you to make a point publicly.
Yes, but that's not about you looking good.
That is about me looking good, actually.
No. Why are you trying to ascribe my intentions?
Because you are ascribing
Actually,
you are ascribing my intentions.
You're right.
If you're it doesn't matter. And I also need to say that it's really fucking annoying for you to sit there and try and like pick out specific wording to try and weasel out of things, and that's what I'm going to call it right now because I'm pissed off about it. You try and use specific wording to weasel out of things like, well, I didn't say this, but you never say what you actually said. You just say, like, well, I didn't say that. That itself is a lie, especially, and I know that he's going to fall into this thing, don't call me a liar, but if somebody's saying, this is what you've done, and you go, well, that's not what I did, but it was pretty much the exact same thing, but you're like hyper focused on one specific word, that is also lying.
Disregarding the constant hypocrisy from Aaron, riddled throughout this call, between Aaron cutting Lio off while getting annoyed at him doing the same, to ascribing his intent when he's been doing the same in their mind, if the hyper-focus on semantics to Aaron is a lie, Aaron has focused on the individual wording of Lio, hyper-focusing on the lack of I feel when in explaining how he feels about Aaron's abrupt muting of him being to embarrass him.
You said that Lumi came in shouting at you, but he didn't. And then you instantly went on to talking about me and said that, and you didn't even name me. You were like doing this with like, oh well, somebody was doing that, as if like I was just so annoying that there's not even point mentioning me by name.
Yeah, I think you're reading too much intention there, but go ahead.
And then you were saying that I, like, intentionally went in there to embarrass you,
which isn't saying that's how you feel. That was you saying that I was intentionally doing it that way. And then when Lumi said that you and him both know that that's not true, you said, well, I don't know. We don't know that, do we? As if, like, you're questioning everything I do, and that I do things intentionally to, like, just do bad.
But in the original mod call, Lio follows up him stating that to Lumi with, I could explain my thought process, showing that he, in some way, has a different read on the situation. And Lumi disregards that outright, saying that we should know the intentions of Aaron.
I made it abundantly clear why I was. And instead of that being respected and understood, I had somebody come in the call, talk down to me, server mute me, and treat me like a child again. I am sick and tired of being told how I'm trusted when I clearly am not.
Okay, but like, because you're trusted doesn't mean you're not going to be corrected if you do something that somebody else thinks is wrong.
There's a difference between correction and intentionally embarrassing somebody in front of 100+ people.
That was not the intention, and we both know it.
I don't know, Lumi.
I do.
Both know it. No, we don't.
I do.
We don't know that.
I
do. I could give you my thought process, but your mind's made up, so I'm not going to.
I think it's also worth mentioning that Aaron hyper-focuses on Lio calling what Lumi did yelling, when it's verifiable that Lumi came in at the very least heated, especially when they perceived himself as being cut off.
Right, I don't want to come in here like angry, I don't want to come in here yelling, but I personally think it was going a bit too far.
Like, it's very obvious to me that my thought processes aren't trusted here. I'm just going to say that outright.
It's not about trust. It is not about trust at all.
Stop.
Are you cutting me off again?
No, go ahead. I'm not trying to, Lumi. I'm trying to explain my thought process here.
Yeah, but like...
Okay.
Hold on, Hidden. You don't let me finish what I'm saying, and then you're cutting me off again?
I just said that I don't think I'm trusted, and I was trying to expand, and you interjected. I was just trying to finish my thought.
Alright, in that case, I'll apologize. I'll back away, but... We do trust you. We do. If we didn't, we wouldn't be so open to tell you if you have a problem with something.
Which I also think is particularly interesting, given Aaron wants to call what Lio did in the Raven call coming in aggressive and snapping at Lumi when he spoke up, when that on its own is pretty dubious of a claim in itself.
Okay. I'm not going to go further on that. I'm asking for a reason, Lumi, before you interrupt.
I was going to ask what the relevance of being able to drive was.
I told you I'm asking that for a reason. Can you please let me work here?
Look, I'm just going to say it outright. Neither of these two trusted each other, which realistically could be a failing on both their ends. It's so abundantly obvious that both of them were super on edge and didn't know how to address the situation, how to talk to one another, how to just be normal under all that stress, which to a degree I understand and get, but this constant and obvious lack of communication between the two of them shouldn't just be written off as abuse on one side unfairly. Especially when, out of everything that Aaron pushes onto Lio, none of it is actually proven. Note how in the post-Raven mod call, Aaron was willing to directly call to something that Lio had said visually, and in the second post-Raven call between the two of them, Aaron was willing to cut to Lio apparently treating them poorly as examples of him doing this. But it's only when things could be directly called to. When it comes to Lio trying to get the mods to dislike Aaron, nothing. When it comes to knowingly yelling at Aaron when they were regressing, no evidence showing Lio knew. When it comes to Lio being okay with his friends sexually harassing Aaron, there is zero evidence given to the public to actually prove any of the claims made in the videos. And it's not like Aaron doesn't know how to address serious allegations like that. I mean, after all, they used to cover these topics. Now, I'll admit I'm doing a lot of ranting and raving about Rosa and Raven, specifically in regards to Aaron's dishonesty. And technically, this is the chapter where I'm supposed to be talking about Lio's problems. But I think it's important to acknowledge where the fault on both sides comes in during this situation, because Aaron has spent so long poisoning the well around Lio that if I just kept acknowledging Lio's shortcomings, it would undermine and devalue all of the hard work I put into researching and analyzing this. But I also don't just intend to let Lio off without fault, because he does have his own issues, especially seen within this call. As mentioned before, Lio doesn't really understand mental health that well, and that is a bit of an issue when we're talking about dealing with people who are on the spectrum, or who were previously victims of abuse themselves. By his own admission to me behind the scenes, so take this with a grain of salt if you want, mental health was pretty frowned upon where he grew up, so he never really properly learned how to address or assess how someone acts when they are neurodivergent or struggling with other mental problems. That much is obvious to me, given that he, for the better part of his career in predator hunting, despite not swearing, was just casually calling people the R-slur. Now with this in mind, I do feel like Lio is still growing in this regard. He hasn't used that kind of language since the turning point of 2023, and uses it even less going into the current year. So it's obvious to me that he is striving to learn and grow regarding how to approach these things. This kind of intelligence is learned behavior. No one knows how to just approach these things out the gate. And much of this can be said about prior situations, such as the one surrounding a user by the name of Jibs the Pig. This is a situation all 3 mods talked about within their documents.
I believe they told me to keep contact with them and that we were going to do another call to go over everything, but I never did that.
During all this, he's preying on another child. You're facilitating it. Then you hide it from us. So not only have you hidden your interactions with Vita, you hide the fact that he's preying on yet another child. Why? Don't tell me you don't know. If you say that, I'm going to genuinely lose my mind on you.
I did not want to deal with the repercussions of my actions back then.
You didn't mind doing it. You just didn't want the consequences. So you like talking to a guy who likes to put his hands or wants to put his hands on children, slips into their DMs. I'm such a lesbian, I wouldn't like a guy. But you still have him in your life. Even after we tell you explicitly that that is unacceptable. After you thank us for getting you away from him, but you didn't actually get away from him. You just lied to everybody who cared enough to try to help you.
Now this is a situation I know I frankly have no business discussing, knowing that the mods who used the story had also previously no right to discuss it by the account of the victim in the situation.
I would like to preface this with the fact that I was never reached out to by any of the people who released this information. This was done without my consent, and if I had been reached out to, I would have said no, as many people who I have spoken with about this topic are aware of. Also, my pronouns currently are he, they, and my pronouns at the time of this call were they, them. She, her is used in this call to refer to me, which is not correct, but was also not malicious or intentional. And due to that fact, I'm not okay with people using this to claim transphobia.
So I won't go too in detail about my 2 cents in this regard. Not my horse, not my race. However, I will focus on what it is we do have context for, which is Lio grilling and berating a grooming victim for getting back into contact with their groomer. Again, given how long ago this was, I wouldn't hold him to this very heavily, but it still is something that I told him he should address and apologize for if he hadn't already, because this kind of behavior is incredibly not okay, and is a pretty good example as to what I mean when I say that Lio has a hard time grasping the topic of mental health. During this time, it was obvious that Lio had no clue that those who are groomed feel a reliant attachment to those who are grooming them. It's literally how people tend to groom their victims. What one should do in a situation like this isn't shame the victim for being back in contact with their groomer, but instead work to try to get the victim away from their groomer and allow them not to feel so reliant on them. I would imagine Lio knows this nowadays, or at least I would hope he does, but until he gets into a situation like that again, we'll never really know. That said, I also do want to give a shout out to Axe Eons on Twitter for bringing up another good point for me to mention after this portion of my video was leaked by Kumo. Being that, given Lio's background in predator hunting, his lack of ability to handle mental health topics shows that he was very ill-equipped to even be handling these more severe and sensitive topics to begin with. Because while we can talk about the people he's helped and the situations he has dealt with involving the lesser weirdos, we cannot simply ignore how much damage Lio could have or even did wind up doing to people like Rosa or Jibs. How his lack of understanding to mental health and his more brash or even aggressive tone could have re-traumatized those who he was helping. My need for additional trigger warnings on Cloak and Dagger would be proof enough of that, but these other situations definitely hammer that home a bit more. And I agree that it is worth pointing out, so thank you for that. But of course, this is not the only time Lio has taken a step too far, because we also have the situation surrounding Dreadful Jax. Now, initially when this was brought to my attention in the Cobra Commander Senate call, I had no idea what was going on. It was frankly the first time I really even heard the name. Since then, the name's been brought up a few times, and after a conversation with Streamline Workshop about it, I decided to look into it myself, and yeah, it's a pretty uncomfortable call between Lio and some edgy teenager. So apparently the story goes, Lio threatened this kid with finding where he lives and going into his home, something that I can see where the insinuation lies, even if I myself have my own read on the statement made.
I should be. Give me a few reasons.
Well, number one, I can figure out very quickly where a kid lives by their photo, and I'm pretty sure you probably got one running around.
Contextually, this was after Jax had asked why he should be afraid of Lio, so to me, this read more as an intimidation tactic to bump chests, not really trying to be a threat itself. But I can see why people would say so, especially since at multiple points in this video, Lio directly tells Jax that he'll call Jax a school to say that they're making threats regarding a firearm. Something that also got misconstrued as calling Jax a school shooter. Allegedly, these rumors were sparked by Jax himself, but I have no evidence for or against what actually happened beyond the call on Queen Seraphina's channel, so frankly, again, this is not my business. However, the point of critique that we can extract from this is how to treat certain people in conversations like this. Not because Jax was like a troll or anything. No, trolls absolutely can go too far and dip into illegal territory. In fact, I'd argue trolling period has kind of become a lost art in that regard. But no, I say this because Jax was a kid. Specifically, if I'm not mistaken, a 15-year-old. So essentially, Lio got into a call with an edgy kid talking like a COD Zombies room squeaker, and instead of deciding that it wasn't worth it, joined in, threatening the kid, going through the threat, and while Jax apparently didn't get into trouble for Lio doing so, it's still too far to go for a kid acting tough. But I already know that you know what would have went wrong here. You critique the slideshow commentary community for how we treated minors all the time. Kids will do stupid shit. They often do not know any better and will say things for attention and reaction. Jax saying what he did in the call was obviously to try and upset the old man, and it worked. Much to Jax's chagrin, probably. Now, personally, I'm all for the concept of kids fucking around and finding out, but only when what they're doing can actually be a detriment to those around them. Not when there's just a metaphorical strongman competition. In those situations, you just simply disengage, because to measure yourself against a child when you're around your 30s is simply unfair and frankly quite childish in its own right. It's also worth saying that going to Jax's school first and foremost about the stuff that he's saying online might not have been the best course of action when what Jax was saying was ultimately negligible. Again, I'm not sure if the story was that Lio called him a school shooter or if Lio just went to the school with concerns to the fact Jax allegedly had firearms, but either way, Jax's threat wasn't credible. Hell, I can even agree that the way the Senate used to handle things in 2023 was even rather dubious, given Cloak and Dagger wound up being a public flogging of Key and Tippy for 3 hours, instead of being a productive conversation. But while these are all things I can concede to and understand were problems in the long haul, the question of how long should we hold Lio to the fire for this stuff really has to be raised. Do these regrets and apologies have to be made public? Would that satiate the taste of justice? Maybe. Like, I know what I know because I talk to Lio pretty privately, but as I continue to learn time and time again in this situation, is that people don't know everything I know, so I'm not sure. Regardless, I know Lio does intend to talk about it all himself in his video, so I'll let him speak for himself and see where y'all take it from there. From a personal stance, though, I'm willing to go easier on him because I have personally seen change myself. I have personally seen his struggle trying to improve his conflict resolution skills, and I've heard his regrets and intentions to grow. Though, I ain't a victim, I ain't someone who Lio hurt, so I guess really what room do I have to talk about all this? Who knows? I just know y'all would want me to talk about it, so here I am, doing just that. I won't stay too long on this subject, mostly because I'm not really involved in this topic, but it's still in my video because it bears mentioning. So there's a lot you could say about Hopeless Peaches. In 2020, 2021, Aaron was done pretty dirty, and I won't deny that. In fact, even after all of this is said and done, I still have every intention to go into discussions about their prior drama with the mindset that would have been had during the time. I feel like this is important for a pertinent and honest discussion of retrospective situations. I mean, it's not the only time we've ever had to approach retrospective discussion in a similar way. Look towards Spoctor, regardless of how you feel about the guy nowadays, and trust me, I definitely have my own grievances. We shouldn't retroactively look back at stories and Pentagrin's allegations with any sense of credibility to them, because regardless of what Spoctor was actually guilty of post-dating that situation, the allegations themselves were dubious at best. It doesn't suddenly mean what was disproven suddenly means nothing, you know? I also will not take away what Aaron had potentially done positively in regards to the Glitchtail stuff. Grant you, I don't know a ton of that situation. I didn't follow it all that closely myself, but I do know that many people did start turning to what Aaron did in that situation as a way to therein defend Camilla Cuevas retrospectively. Which I also feel isn't okay, not for the situation, and it definitely isn't fair on the victims who Aaron helped out. But with this said, I also feel, much like Spoctor, Hopeless Peaches might have also had the tendency to get away with shit they otherwise should not have gotten away with post-dating their drama. We do wind up getting to a point where we collectively have a harder time criticizing creators who find themselves cleared up in a drama because we don't want to repeat the same false allegations that might have been raised before. We don't want to become the next prison mate Luke, the next Pentagrin. We don't want to join the Hall of Infamy. We don't want to be the next internet villain. Or at least, most of us don't. More on that later. We want to make sure our ducks are in a row to the point that some people won't even make claims against another individual in fear that they may get put into the unfair spotlight again, which is kind of why I have to respect at least a little bit to those who aren't afraid to get their hands a little dirty when criticism does need to be raised a bit. Again, we'll come back to that. With that said, it does not come as easy for me to sit here, look at someone who I thought was a friend, and have to come to the realization Hopeless Peaches is a liar, a manipulator, and an abuser. Considering the initial allegations made against Aaron years prior, it especially doesn't come as easy for me to say, because I do still look back at some of the allegations made against Aaron back then with a sense of discredibility and skepticism. I empathize with them in that regard. But given the stuff that I've seen from looking back, peeling back that curtain, it becomes quite clear that Aaron wanted the world to revolve around them. I've already detailed some of the things that Aaron deliberately lied about in the last chapter surrounding that call with Raven Pines, but that is far from the only thing that they had been lying about, either regarding a situation or a creator. Thuman is one such example, and was the first thing that I was able to debunk to Lio the minute all of this stuff started. Aaron, for some time now, has said that Thuman never once apologized for being involved with the situation surrounding them, and to me directly claimed that Thuman only ever apologized as Zay, previously known as Kai Weiss, had called her out publicly. But that's just verifiably untrue, since we have at least 7 instances of Thuman apologizing directly to Aaron, and at least one of those predates when Zay made their video on her. So Aaron deliberately disregarded those specifically to continue holding a grudge and talking shit about Thuman to other people, myself included. But as we've come to find out, Thuman is not the only person Aaron's been like that with. Aaron's been insanely two-faced, insanely vindictive, and insanely petty. I've already alluded prior to how they felt about the SCC before, when hearing about my Veritas video, said that we in the SCC were oversensitive, despite Veritas being a bandwagon by that point, and the announcement of my video was just hype shit, but sure, oversensitive, whatever. It's not even the first time Aaron was like that either. It's actually something I acknowledge in my video on Neko Coda, when Aaron and I had a call about Coda twisting what Tippy said about her to spin it as Tippy holding a victim to their groomer. The call eventually devolved into just shooting this shit, where Aaron and I made some jokes of them possibly joining the SCC. Specifically because the community they were already a part of was being hypercritical of them. Yeah, I'll send you a video if you want to happen to know more about SCC related stuff. I actually made a video about it.
I'm gonna come into the SCC and then make the Peaches drama part 2.
No!
I'm gonna criticize someone mildly in someone's DMs and it's all gonna kick off again. I'm just gonna like DM someone like, yeah, Susie's latest video, it just wasn't it, you know?
I mean, I'd be willing to hear you out. Like,
no, I want full blown. Can't believe it. She did it again. She came from the art community, destroyed that community. Now she's here trying to do it all at once.
God, no. Oh, I thought you were talking about, because I've been accused of being part of the art community.
No, you'll be just there like, no, she came from those fuckers. Now she's fucking back. She's here to destroy our community. How could she do this?
A lot of us...
Jump from community to community, making the same drama over and over again.
A lot of as I said, we don't really do large-scale situations typically, so...
I'll have to bring Camilla with me. Like, I feel like they're a staple. They've been in, like, every wide-scale drama that I've been in. Camilla's, like, a long-time fan of mine, I think, so she can follow along with me to the SCC. That way she can, like, do the whole, oh yeah, back in 2018, this happened, and I go, oh yeah, you little shit, you go. And then we move on to the commentary bros. Same thing.
As I said, we're a lot more receptive than people tend to think we are when it comes to criticism, though. So.
Oh no, but it has to happen. That's the way that Shannon said it has to happen.
Then maybe you should start with the commentary, bros, because you'd be here forever if you tried that with us. But then after this call, Aaron took to Twitter to talk about the SCC being just as bad as the art community, which did sting a little bit. I don't know, maybe Aaron's right in that I am oversensitive, who knows. Did feel a little two-faced at the time though, not gonna lie. But then later on, they did try joining in on SCC culture, joining in on the Nexus and the courthouse, specifically to be more ingrained with the community, something they had told me previously was something they were genuinely considering. This, by the way, predated my Veritas video, where they had called the SCC too oversensitive. Predated the Raven stuff, that they showed zero interest in to the point they downplayed it all, and of course post-dating this moment where they claim the SCC is scary and weird. Aaron constantly sent mixed messages about our niche little community, and I was just kind of strung along for the ride, unfortunately. I don't know, I guess that's exactly what I get for being too forgiving. But Aaron would talk shit about a lot of people that would otherwise have been in their circles. Aaron is the reason Lio insinuated a threat towards Streamline Workshop in his Crystal Flame video.
I know I've touched upon it earlier, but I want to use this chance to really highlight just how malicious Crystal and their other server members have conducted themselves while this was all going on. All of them celebrating Peach's supposed downfall, hyping people up for it, and how it's been coming for years, and talking about how everyone's too scared to criticize Peaches for their drama. And Crystal went along with it. That has nothing to do with hyping yourself up, Crystal. It's celebrating someone else's pain in a hug box. An example of people acting inappropriately is this user here. I know who this user is. And they know that I know. You, specifically, have been in the Senate for about a year. If Peaches has behavior that's troubling, you could have approached them at any time to do so. Instead, you sat in this server and made catty comments about what's going on like it's some tea. And based on your content, I know you know better.
Aaron would constantly talk about Scritus and Spy-V downplaying or making a mockery of their grooming. Went after Nezzy Monster for allegedly calling out racism where there was none, something they would also attribute back to Thuman. Had a lot to say about Mali Malware and the company she keeps, and disregarded Sister Zio's concern for Aaron's health as lying. Mind you, this is only a small fraction of examples as the kinds of people Aaron would talk shit about or be two-faced about behind the scenes. And while I'm not going to say that a little venting or a little gossiping is necessarily a bad thing, I mean, it is, but literally everyone in this space does it, so who am I to judge? Aaron's particular brand of gossip was very focused, and very centered on the notion that they could get people away from Lio that way. In short, Aaron used gossip and drama as an isolation tactic to manipulate and get Lio away from people that Aaron didn't like. And there is no better example than Aaron's pretty consistent grudge against Harley TBS. Now, I recall Aaron and Harley being pals in 2022, but I suppose that was fairly short-lived, because beyond that point, Aaron was very strictly anti-Harley, trying to find dirt on them or otherwise spreading allegations against Harley without any regard to whether or not it's true. And this one got particularly bad, because in this beef we can see how it affected Lio and the actions he took regarding Harley as a person. Having had his perspective repainted to see Harley as a monster. Just about everything in this regard was Aaron's fault, because when Harley did do something disagreeable and thinking prison mate Luke's apology was fine, Lio was initially quick to disregard it because they were still young. However, what we heard publicly after the conversation with Aaron paints a different picture.
To demonstrate this, let me bring up a tweet of Harley TBS. This is honestly a good video. It's only here for him to acknowledge fault, and I totally respect that. Credit to him for owning up. And as you can see here, if you pause and read, it got an appropriate reaction from Hopeless Peaches. Look, Harley, I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack because you're a kid. Just a little bit. Because you're also a kid that called another kid weak for apologizing after getting doxxed and harassed for making cringe Minecraft videos. Let's be honest here, Harley, your channel isn't a coffee channel. I know you try to say that to differentiate yourself from tea channels, but coffee is what adults use to get up and get work done. You want to be a coffee channel? Get some actual consistent moral values and stick to them.
When Lio wanted to directly help Harley dealing with people going after them, Aaron pushed back. Lio was not allowed in the eyes of someone who he considered family to give any clemency towards Harley. And keeping to this, Aaron would feed Lio all sorts of alleged behaviors of Harley, treating them like a monster.
You know my value about that in terms of like hanging out with people that other people don't vibe with. Unless they're a monster.
The problem I have here, Mally, is that in some cases I think you do genuinely hang out with monsters.
I guess we can probably discuss that a little bit, because I'm assuming you're referring to Oranges and Harley?
What? No, Oranges didn't do anything.
Oh, sorry. Then who?
Other than being British, which is just
well, that
horrible.
is a fucking crime. You do need to put them down for that. But who then?
I think that Harley's a problem because of their inconsistency, their inability to treat things properly. There's been several instances of Harley treating predator accusations as games. There's been instances of Harley taking over a month to address their server members or server mods accusing somebody of being a rapist, as well as the time they put somebody in the hospital for accusing them of being a groomer with no evidence. There's the attempted defense of Spoctor that thankfully hasn't come out yet and hopefully never will. Harley has a lot of problematic behavior that I don't think needs to be encouraged by interaction, frankly.
Like, I understand. There's only so much leeway we can give the old man in regards to his behavior. And like I said in the last chapter, there are things that he should atone for and things I further believe he should be allowed to grow from. But the way that Lio treated the likes of those in the art community, specifically those who Aaron had a grudge with, wasn't built on honest feelings and beliefs. They were the beliefs of a manipulative individual whispering in his ear the entire time. Manipulation can happen at any age for any reason. Falling victim to manipulation and deception has no expiration date, and it's important that we understand this and realize it going forward. Because much of the behaviors behind the scenes from what Lio believes about some people were predicated on what Hopeless Peaches thought of them first. This is also seen within that aforementioned Crystal Flame video that Lio released. Though there are many criticisms to have of that video, one that I heard from people specifically was that Lio did it before he could address his own allegations, which is a fair criticism. You can only do so much when your credibility is on the line after all. But this is again something that Aaron pushed for a lot harder. Aaron wanted to be cleared first. Aaron wanted Lio to come to their defense. And mind you, Aaron was the one with the bigger platform before they deleted it. This is also particularly notable given how Aaron treated Lio specifically. Prior to ushering Lio to rush out the Crystal Flame video, Aaron told them that they didn't want to be in contact with him anymore, and was even told by Lumitro that asking anyone about how they're doing would amount to block evading. However, Aaron themselves reached out to push Lio to make the Crystal Flame video literally a day or two after. Like, what could you have possibly expected or wanted, Peaches? Well, actually that's a rhetorical question, because we know exactly what Aaron wanted at all times. It kind of becomes painfully obvious when you stand back and look at their actions and statements. The world had to revolve around what Aaron was interested in, at all times. If Aaron was disinterested, it would be seen as pathetic and below them. We already saw that with the SCC and the stuff that we were dealing with, but it was always just something that we'd seen within Aaron's behavior. It was kind of right in front of us the whole time.
Hello, you are live.
Hello.
Okay, so now, because you are here, let me go ahead and
Stream it.
You want me to just stream it? Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, show me the thingamajiggy.
The thingamajiggy. We have Hopeless Peaches here with us because she must be extremely bored.
No, I'm not bored. I try to go to sleep, and then I try to go to sleep.
You try to go to sleep, and then you try to go to sleep.
So, hello everyone. I'm here because I see that he's like streaming cringe. I see that he's like failing at life.
Always.
So, and the reason why I sound like this is because I'm on painkillers. Thank you. That is part of the reason why I couldn't quite sleep, because even with painkillers, I had massive shooting of pain up my entire life.
Well, the chat's
So,
happy to see you.
hopefully this will be... Of course, the chat's happy to see me, because you guys know that I'm cooler than whatever this dog does. So...
This is true.
Tell me what's going on. Don't give me like a big rundown, because I don't care, but like...
TLDR.
I heard cease and desist letter.
TLDR, some dumb idiot started a fight, and whenever he gets any sort of consequences, he makes himself out to be a victim.
Oh, okay, just like everyone else. Okay.
Yep. Trying to run a harassment campaign, and when he gets called on it, he acts like it's a surprise that people are mad at him. So, let's continue.
Anyone else remember this stream? Because I remember this stream. Lio just wanted to nerd out and talk about some collector drama, and the whole time Aaron was just disinterested in everything and complaining about it the whole way. This would also explain the constant talking about Camilla Cuevas and Omnia throughout the chat logs that we went through. Frankly, there was so much I didn't bother grabbing many screenshots of it. Look, this trash talk wouldn't personally bother me as much if it wasn't so obviously emotionally manipulative in nature and in spite of whatever anyone else was doing or going through. That's all. Otherwise, it would be so easy for me to write this off as, Peaches was messy. I have plenty of friends who are messy. It's whatever. People like their tea. It's why any of us are still in work. My point is, there's a time, place, and way of spilling tea, and I don't think it's very healthy or appropriate to purposely pour yours all over the table and then call your father away from his train sets to clean it up. That's all I'm saying. Am I making any sense? Have I lost you all in the metaphor? Then allow me to segue briefly into Aaron's abusive nature, which was also used to control Lio. Again, I won't go super in detail with that, as I don't feel like it's my story to share. That's more so Lio's, as he was the victim in this regard, but from the rampant body shaming that Aaron did of Lio, to using their life as a bargaining chip, to disregarding boundaries, Aaron is much like Ray Mills in that regard, that if it could be used to abuse or control someone, they've done it. And if not directly to Lio, then to those close by Lio. See, the Burger King Club chat that Aaron made in the midst of everything. A chat that was used explicitly to talk shit about Lio and conspire against him, literally treating his trust as both a plaything and as leverage to get more out of him to use in those exposed documents. This was apparently because Aaron was not only manipulating Lio against the art community, but was also manipulating the other Senate mods against Lio. For more details on that, there's Zach Not Kyle's video. This chat was kind of the smoking gun for a lot of realizations leading up to what we know now, and I don't think any of us are necessarily better for it. But it's important to note this behavioral pattern, as it shows us that Aaron's word cannot really be trusted. But on that note, speaking of food club chats, let's get off of the Lio stuff and on to... So first, before I get into this chapter, I'd like to apologize to Laka Mocha Laka. We had our first interaction during this whole ordeal, and when asked questions about my particular involvement in the Fruitcake Club, I panicked and got my wires all sorts of crossed and couldn't give them the straight answers that I thought I had. And that's very much in part because my memories of the FCK were very much clouded by my most recent peruse through the chat 4 years after having left there. During a call that was had with Akumu and Nezi in the Senate in May of 2023, Nezi and I only really prior knew the FCK as that chat Toasty Vanilla ran, or for me, that chat that sparked the Toby Majestic drama. We obviously did not remember a ton of what went on in that chat in hindsight, and so the conversation obviously didn't really feel all that productive as a result. I could have told you a vague recollection regarding how Toasty allowed porn in like every chat, but even I had trouble recalling specifics, so having gone through much of the logs that were exported for me to go through might have repainted my perspective on what all actually happened in there. So I hope I didn't confuse you too much, Laka, and if I did, I'm sorry. That said, I also have to thank you for that conversation, not only because I was able to dispel a notion regarding how much I helped ponder Sprocket's Spoctor Theory videos, a notion I frankly was not even aware of was actually there to begin with, but also because it did get me to rethink and look back into my time actually in the FCK. And I think I've pieced together my timeline better, so let me go through it. So when the Senate Archive crew of 3 went through the logs, we did find that I had joined March 31st, 2020, and last posted June 3rd, 2020, which tells me that as far as activity goes, that was my most active time frame, which, frankly, given how few messages I posted in there, is really surprising. But I also remember the Ben the Looney stuff happening in there, which, if I'm not mistaken, had to be like late June, early July-ish, so there could have been a month period where I just sat in the chat and didn't pay it very much mind. With that said, my involvement within the chat was very lukewarm. Like, maybe there's 1 or 2 conversations where I either worded myself in a slightly inappropriate way, such as my conversation with Fuchsia Butters about what we want out of our transition, or otherwise joined in on a conversation I should have stopped, such be the conversation about people drawing porn of YouTubers. And while I'm sorry if I made anyone uncomfortable by that, I should clarify that my interactions with the people in there were under the presumption that the chat wasn't how the chat actually was. And by that I mean, I had no idea that there were any minors within it. The first conversation I had with anyone in that chat was Toasty asking if there were any bad blood between me and the others in the chat. And I listed off everyone that I knew in there, being Just a Robot, Manga Common, and Ben the Looney, with Toasty themselves pointing out that I previously knew the names Junkie and Nezzy Monster, as well as Ellie Momelli, who by the time that I was in there dipped from the chat. I knew no one else, and in my time in there, while I definitely met some of the other people, like this was the chat where my very brief friendship with Madlibs and Fuchsia Butters was sparked, as well this was the server where I briefly chatted with Peaches, ZZ, and Toby, I otherwise never really got to know anyone other than Toasty themselves. They were the person I had the most consistent voice chats with, as well as like one other person in there, but for the life of me I cannot remember their name. I just knew that they weren't a content creator, but were one of Toasty's pals. Mind you, even me being in voice chats was sporadic on its own, but of the handful of chats that I did have a call with Mimi Diggs, though her age was never brought into the conversation, and I can only say this because I had no idea they even were a minor until their statement came out, as well as a call or 2 with Teddy Draw Stuff, but Teddy in my time being there was only there for about a month, and I remember this because I reached out to Toasty to see if Teddy was okay on April 29th. Her age was also never brought to my attention, and I can say this for the same reason. As for Slimmers, I remember a conversation where Toasty told me that they weren't in the chat anymore, and looking back through the logs, unless I'm missing something, I didn't see any conversation between the two of us via chat. Plus, looking through the logs, Slimmers does disappear around the time that I joined, so that would seem reasonable for me to have overlooked the little bit that she was in there for. I definitely do not recall ever talking with Slimmers, is the point. So I was in the dark about a lot of things, and given how Toasty would just casually post porn everywhere, were it someone else, I could say it'd be a bit forgivable if they mistook the chat for an 18+ server. Like, literally one of the rules in there was that you had to tell people if you were a virgin, so I don't know, what would you have expected? Especially since prior I was also in Chaos 55T's personal NSFW server, the Pregnancy Haven. Or something like that, which, again, was also 18+ to my knowledge. Again, I then dipped around the time of the Ben the Looney stuff, and then I think I learned that Toasty was a creep around the video Galbano made on the Toby Majestic and Toasty Vanilla stuff in October of that year. But by that point, I had already stopped really talking with Toasty, I had backed out of the Fruitcake Club, and many of the ties were severed by that point, barring like Junkie, Chaos, and Nezzy. I didn't really keep in contact with very many people by that point, and so a lot of what happened hadn't really kept in my mind, not helped by the fact that, as I was also reminded as of scripting, that Gal had gone back on what they had said about Toasty like a few months later.
I almost ruined 3 lives. One is Mario Kutsu, another is Toasty Vanilla, who I am in good terms with and has been on another account for their safety. The last one is named Two.
I especially didn't have the logs by that point. I'd only gotten my own copy of the logs by November of 2023, so I could look through them for the Ben the Looney conversation while I was making my video on Spockter. Of course, we know what happened between then and now. I've been terribly busy with medical problems and SCC cleanup, so there's not really much that needs to be discussed as to why I hadn't talked about this sooner, something else that had been asked of me in the Laka call. I only started looking through the logs when it was requested of me by Lio in February of this year, and so prior, I didn't remember everything, and when I could be reminded of it all, I hadn't had the ability to. So, yeah, take that as you will. You can choose to believe me or not. After all, much of the FCK stuff is very messy, and my memory has been and could still be very faulty. If there are inaccuracies in what we can see in logs, or someone else from the chat can remember something, then I can come back and make corrections when needed, but that's more or less my full testimony that I can give you now. However, This situation isn't about me. It shouldn't be about me, and I do not want it to be about me. Like, I can only give you my perspective at the end of the day, but it's not the perspective that matters the most. The perspective that matters the most is of the victims of Toasty Vanilla and the others in the chat. And I hope it's been talked about by the point that this is released, but I had learned that there was some actual grooming by members of the chat in there, unfortunately most of it being very external. So you're gonna want to listen to the stories of those who were groomed, listen to the names that they bring up, listen to the stories that these people tell, as it's them that are the most important. Now that's not to underplay the behavior in the server. There is a lot of guilty parties, and even my friends who had gotten involved in areas where they shouldn't have. But the hyper-focusing on who was in the server instead of the what actually happened in there is, at least in my opinion, a problem. Thuman's video probably should be out by the time this video is, so her video allowing the victims to speak will also be linked in the description below. And if it's not, well, when it's released, it will be, and I'll probably link it in my community tab. But that said, as much as the victims in this matter the most, they are the people who have been considered the least from what I've seen. Akumu and the Fruitcake Club Leaks account run by Galbanum had been making much of this conversation about themselves, Lio, and the Senate. And this gross disregard to the victims that this discussion could help is frankly irresponsible of the both of them. Let's start with Gal. Galbanum was an ex-SCC member who used to go by the name only Jesp. This is not the name they wish to go by now, so from this point on I will only be referring to them as Gal. But I bring up this previous alias to give context to where I stand with them. Gal was a member of the community that I hang around. Gal was also a member of my commentary group, the Cloud Palace. With this, you can probably imagine my frustrations when they go around on their accounts to try and start shit with those they know better than the accusations they've been making about us. Calling the slideshow commentary community transphobic for using a name that wasn't even considered a dead name by that point has gotta be the most wild accusation I've ever heard. Because many of us are trans and commonly will show our support when we need to. Hell, the biggest person Gal took beef with in said thread was Jace, who is trans-masked non-binary themselves. And for what? Saying that they were holding back their inner frustrations with you in fear of getting banned off of Twitter? Mind you, this isn't even the first time that Gal had gone around making wild or faulty allegations against those in the SCC. They've had quite the grudge with us since we kicked them out because of the shit that they were doing while in the community. Link to those stories down below too if they're ready. Hell, they even once alluded to the SCC being a trigger for them directly, talking about how scared they were of us.
So, I have this video unlisted for a reason. Mainly because I'm kinda scared of the SCC, and given how this person acted at the end of his video, I just don't want this out there in the open where this dude could also lash out at me. I'm kind of scared of getting screamed at for just telling someone to chill the hell out. So please guys, don't send this video to Boone without my permission. I prefer sending it on my own volition or having someone send it with my consent. Anyone sending it without my consent is most likely a spy. If I do publicize this, that's probably mainly if people are not going to give me shit for this, or if Boone actually seems to agree with how I handled this. I just want as little drama as possible, given I've been going through a lot. If you really want to know, just ask me in DMs. I don't want to talk about my issues publicly.
Needless to say, if we did genuinely do something to Gal to cause this reaction, that trauma obviously hasn't lasted very long. Because a year after Gal disappeared, they're back in the spotlight with this FCK Leaks account and trying to dredge back up old drama between they and us. They will never tell anyone why we have beef. They've been rather good about not mentioning the one person who they've affected the most from their shenanigans. But Gal, we know. We just haven't shown everything what you've done because, one, it's not our place to, it should be your victims to speak out against you first, and two, when we did mention that you were behind that account, people labeled us as trying to distract from the FCK logs. However, that was not an attempt to distract from the FCK logs, because those who were actually in the FCK during that time had already mentioned their involvement and apologized. Nezzy did, Allie did, and I'm pretty sure I acknowledged that I was once in there, though didn't feel much the need to apologize given I was already being labeled as an innocent party by Gal themselves. However, mentioning who was behind the account was to be a warning that this person should not be trusted with the information they have. In fact, Gal really shouldn't be involved at all in this event because we knew they couldn't handle it. And it doesn't even have to be because of any long-standing grudge between us and Gal. They haven't affected me nearly as much as they've affected my friends, after all. I was just some messenger to them. No, I don't think Gal can be trusted in this situation because they have a tendency to hyperbolize or overblow things. They have a tendency to sensationalize things, and they have a tendency to make everything a huge fucking spectacle. Even their best videos, in my opinion, are rife with over-dramatization and them using specific language that puts things in a much harsher light than it ever really should have been in. I remember their videos on Semantics and Junkie, is all I'm saying. To give a specific example of what I mean from within this situation, they did some talking about Nezzy Monster and how they apparently enabled Toasty's degenerate behavior. However, this is a particular bee in my bonnet because even within the Fruitcake Club logs themselves, we can see that Nezzy Monster was the reason the NSFW chat in the server was pulled. This is something they should know, being the Fruitcake Club leaks. But this is something suspiciously left out of the stuff that they talk about. Like, no, I won't say Nezzy was a perfect little angel. I said as such in my Brook video. I was the reason Nezzy even remembered any of the stuff that they put in the chat. And noodle nudie memes aside, and let's do it like they do in Minecraft aside, I found that Nezzy actually was rather critical of Toasty behind the scenes. Nezzy drew boundaries for their own server when Toasty posted porn in their chat. Nezzy warned Toasty that new servers should have roles and rules in play, probably because of the lack of moderation prior. The last thing that Nezzy had to shake Toasty down about was in regards to their rampant pornography spamming. So what the fuck do you mean enabling? The very worst that Nezzy did was partake in the toxic and unhealthy server culture briefly for like a month of them being there. Them joining into the inappropriate server culture was ultimately sporadic. And yeah, Nezzy shouldn't have done that. I'm in agreement there. Contrary to what Akumu will have y'all believe, I'm not just running defense for Nezzy, because I do agree that they did have things to answer for. But not immediately recognizing there is a problem isn't inherently enabling. And I've looked through those logs, talked with people who spoke with the victims themselves, and I've seen what you two in particular have against them. It feels like y'all are heavily overstating what they've actually done because you have a grudge. Nezzy is guilty of some things, yes, but otherwise has answered for the things that they did do. Maybe not specifically and with direct examples, but they have, and the victims don't seem to hold any ill will about it, if what I've heard from those talking with the victims is any indicator. But we will have to come back to Nezzy throughout this video, of course, because they really like to specifically name them as one of the bigger perpetuators. Also, if I can just be petty for a second, just generally speaking, if you're gonna make an account under the guise of helping victims and exposing actually harmful people, maybe don't use your platform to shill out your personal Twitter account. It just kind of feels like bad optics, gal. Now, as for Akumu, this is where things get particularly frustrating because Akumu's way of approaching the FCK is dangerously generalizing and, if I may speak frankly, kinda dishonest. Like, Akumu will focus on presenting things that he can prove, such be the case with bad behavior and sexual posting, the exact thing I explicitly agreed to being the case in my video on Brook. And yeah, after my Brook video, I sat down to watch Akumu's vid, and yes, I'll even give him that people did talk shit about him and even conspire against him in the chat. That is also something that is verifiable. But when it requires reading nuance between the lines, or giving more benefit of doubt in his investigations, he tends to come up short, takes things as uncharitably as possible, or otherwise disregards it entirely because he can make a much bigger spectacle about it. Such be how Akumu starts presenting the FCK logs to us within his video.
The Fruitcake Club, or the FCK, was a group of art commentary cows, or people that were around the art commentary community. Some of the art community's favorite art-tards, or even the commentary communities, were in this group, like Nezzy Monster, Madlibs, Miss ZZ, Doodletones, Dumbsville, Toby Majestic, Nani, The Name's Junkie, Fuchsia Butter, Just a Robot, Hopeless Peaches. The abandoned account is Hopeless Peaches. Here's a screenshot showing the account before she changed the username to Abandoned Account, and here's an interaction confirming that the account is Peaches. Teddy the Draws, though her previous account is now deleted, and there are at least 2 other deleted accounts, so it can be difficult to discern who is who, unless she's texting her cringy Teddy noises, or sends screenshots from her DMs, or even from her YouTube channel. There's also Slimmers, Manga Comment, Mimi Diggs, Toasty Vanilla, OMGIJ252, or Jamesy as he's known, LS Mark, Ben the Looney, One Man Show Off, Chaos55T, and Ellie Momelli. A couple of others that are less known are Scorchel, Mirage, Hoodie, Wayward Wada, Ard Animation, Omega the Slime, Gary, Aurora, who was Madame's Discord server admin, Moo Shadow, and Kitty259. I'm willing to bet I didn't list everyone there, but that's the majority.
Instead of presenting this list to us with specifically guilty or specifically innocent parties noted, Akumu lumps everyone in together as if he's reading the Epstein list. And this is a huge problem when we're talking about a server's bad behavior and potentially harmful actions towards children within the space. Like, I've already established the most openly known minors within that chat being Slimmers, Mimi Diggs, and Teddy. These 3 are, if anything, victims of the server, and shouldn't be put alongside those like Ms. Zizi or Toasty, who were active perpetuators of the sexual content the most. Akumu, choosing to not make this distinction and just listing everyone in there like he does, misconstrues the situation to an outsider and paints people like Teddy and Mimi on the same level as those who were inappropriate and dangerous to their healths. Actually, you could push it further than that and say that Akumu is labeling victims in this situation on the same level as their groomers, whether it's intentional or not. And if that notion on its own isn't enough to make your spine crawl, then there's a problem. Akumu also barely makes note of when people join and when people leave, or even how active the people were in that chat. People like LS Mark, Manga Common, Just a Robot, and Dumbsville all shouldn't really even be names brought up because they were all invited into the server and did pretty much next to nothing. Barring Jar, whose few posts were iconic as hell. Now, I'll be fair and say that these lack of distinctions do get rectified a little bit when Akumu starts listing off the ages of everyone in the chat.
Now, just before we dive right in, I want to clarify the ages of everyone involved with the degeneracy at the time this took place, from October of 2019 to mid-2020. Mad Libs was 19 to 20, Fuchsia Butter was 18, Miss Zizi was 21 to 22, Nani was 22, Tubby Majestic was 25 or 26, Nezzy Monster was 20, Hopeless Peaches was 19 to 20, Toasty Vanilla was 18, and up until April of 2020 he was still in high school. Mimi Diggs was 17, Slimmers was 15, Teddy the Draws was 16, James was 16, LS Mark was 17, Omega the Slime I believe was 16, the name's Junkie was 22. Point is, there were many adults and a couple of minors. These people were aware of their ages. It was a topic brought up multiple times on the server.
But again, this is only a half-truth on Akumu's end. Some ages were stated, yes, and I'll be fair that, barring Toasty, everyone in the server whose ages were stated were all below the age of 18. But of the ages that were in there, Teddy, Weta, Alexo, Snailu, Jamesy, Pollen Patch, and Mimi Diggs were the only ones whose ages I know for sure were talked about in the chat. People like Fuchsia, Nani, Peaches, Nezzy, and others that Akumu names and gives ages about weren't actually touched upon within the chat. Furthermore, at least one of the ages Akumu states in the section is just wrong. Like, I can't confirm the rest of the ages. I got a few asking around, and some were rough answers, so I'll give Akumu what little benefit of doubt I can. But returning back to the point that I spoke about earlier, Nezzy Monster was 19 when he joined the Fruitcake Club, and was that age for the majority of the time that he was in there. Nezzy's birthday is June 12th, and he's 23 as of scripting. He's turning 24 this year, so doing just a little math, we would find that Nezzy would have turned 20 only a mere week before his last known active post in the server on June 25th. And I want to stress the activity because we do know that Nezzy was relatively inactive in there for a month or two after the fact. The NSFW chat was deleted in August after all. Now, what does this change? You, as the strawman I am creating for this rhetorical question, may be asking, and to that I repeat, framing. See, when presenting information, it's important to realize that how you interpret and present your evidence and information is just as important as what it is you are saying while presenting it. This was something I told Akumu a year ago in the context of it not being a good idea to just rampantly antagonize people you want an apology from, or to see take accountability for their actions. Something he had a frankly awful habit of doing some years back under his Noodle Cup Boy alias. Which, yes, for those uninitiated, was Akumu. It's not really exposing him, he's never really hid that fact. I just have to clarify these things because when dealing with someone with alt accounts, you just kinda need to make sure, you know? Anyway, I'm sidetracking. Back to my point. It looks a lot worse to an uninitiated audience member to hear that a 20-year-old was being sexual around a 17-year-old than it would be to hear that a 19-year-old was so. It almost paints a particularly pedophilic undertone when otherwise you would be dealing with a still maturing younger adult goofing around with someone within their general age range. Not that it's exactly excusing it in this context, as sexual imagery was still posted where it shouldn't be, and as the adult in the situation, Nezzy should have been more careful about that. But, and maybe it's a personal value of mine, but 18-year-old and 19-year-olds are still going to be kinda stupid sometimes. Like, as long as they aren't actively hurting others or breaking the law, I tend to go a little easier on them myself depending on the circumstance. Of course, though, that's just my value, and you can take that or leave it as you may. Morality ultimately is subjective at the end of the day. My point is, because I'm getting a little long-winded again, that you need to better present your shit. You need to be able to present your evidence in a way that's understandable to your audience and doesn't leave room for them to have to fill in the gaps with whatever more extreme examples they can come up with. The less your audience has to do your work interpreting things, the better your points become. There's less room for misunderstandings and less room for assumptions to be made. This is also why you'd have to acknowledge the when these ages were stated and who was all a part of those conversations, because commonly within chats, some conversations will be overlooked or missed unless you're someone who's willing to rake through chats obsessively or do often enough backreading, which, if you're anything like me, you probably don't. Especially if it's something like a contextless no-mic chat. There is nuance to these things, is the point, and that's very important when you want to make very serious allegations like Akumu is making, and when you're presented with uncertainties or holes in the story, such being the case surrounding the roughly 7 deleted users in that chat as an example, then you need to do a better job at giving some benefit of doubt or otherwise not making wild assertions about a person's character. Which is another thing we should really talk about, isn't it? Yeah, so Akumu seems to love making wild assertions about someone's character. In fact, the only reason he was as obsessed about the Fruitcake Club logs and exposing them to the internet wasn't because of, like, any victims or anything. No, by his own admission, it was to show how fake, dishonest, hypocritical, and sanctimonious the Art CC is. Yes, I know he also throws LARPy in there, but come on. Coming from Light Yagami over here, I don't want to hear it from him. Plus, it's generally such a nothing point. Like, oh noes, we're cringe, the horror. Whatever. Joking aside, the point is he wants to make a point about dishonesty and hypocrisy, claiming that he's not trying to portray himself as a morally virtuous person, but merely that he wants to tear down the facade that the rest of us are. However, in order to tear down that notion, the individuals in question have to think of themselves in that way first. And Akumu kinda never proves that any of these people do, to my knowledge. I don't know, there's roughly like 30 some odd videos on his channel about this situation, so maybe I'm wrong. I won't discount the possibility. However, if it's his specifically focused FCK video that was supposed to prove this, it would actually help to provide evidence and examples of the art commentators being holier than thou for those who do not want to watch approximately 16 hours of one YouTuber talking more or less the same few talking points for 4 years. Dude has frankly dedicated his channel to this topic. It's insane. Like, sure, we critique, we offer advice, and we do try to be more constructive in our videos when compared to some other forms of commentary, but that doesn't mean we see ourselves with any sort of superiority. I'm pretty sure if you ask any of us, most, if not all of us, would say that we have had a particularly egregious past or have done things that we're not exactly proud of. I have definitely spoken at lengths about my life of regret, and God knows I will never be finished. We will say that Akumu tends to act in bad faith, but you don't need to see yourself as morally superior to call that out, because we can all act in bad faith sometimes. That doesn't make it any less bad when you notice someone else is doing so. We might say Akumu is a dick, but that's because he is. He kind of wants to portray himself as such, so it's not like he wouldn't take that on the chin. Hell, some people will even call him a liar, and that again doesn't need to be called out by a morally virtuous person if we're to go by the logic of Akumu himself. That is, unless Akumu wants to try and backtrack and say that he is morally superior to the rest of us, but then like, that would go against his stated intentions because he says that he doesn't believe he is, and he's been calling us all liars pretty constantly. It'd get contradictory really fast. In any case, I can only for certain speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure that these people who Akumu claim to see themselves as morally superior most likely don't, actually, and would also be willing to admit to making some really bad judgment calls or stupid and shitty, maybe even hurtful mistakes in the past. I would bet that these people would claim to be flawed individuals who can occasionally be rude, mean, or spiteful. So making this your mission statement without making that point clear and concisely kinda doesn't work. You're not being a particularly good salesman if this is the angle you're trying to shoot at. Now, back to the note of calling Akumu a liar, as some of you have been doing, there probably should be evidence as such if you're going to call him out on that, and that goes for any of you doing so. Now, personally, I won't say that I think Akumu is a strict liar. Lying has a particular motivation behind it, and unlike Akumu, I will not make an argument about his motivations without concrete proof of intent to back it up. But I will say I believe he is dishonest with his framing of argumentation and information, deliberately or not, and that on its own should be taken note of going forward whenever Akumu presents information to the public. I mean, in general, you should always be willing to ask questions with everyone, myself included, because I can get things wrong too. But we can talk about the commentary audience's tendency to shrug off the need for skepticism in a later chapter. Point is, work needs to be double-checked sometimes, because a commentator won't always catch issues that they have within their own script. I mean, you kinda have to have at least some confidence in what you're saying, else why would you say it, you know? But when you can easily disprove the smaller things that Akumu says just by the notion of being in a public space...
We, however, had a longtime server member give us access to the logs that Akumu will not release.
Okay, so these DMs are from his LioMan2 account, which he has now completely deleted.
Then it shows that he's, at the very least, careless in what he's actually presenting to the public himself. Like, complicated misinformation, or you had to be theirs is one thing, you know? You can misinterpret things, or just get things wrong without being careless or disingenuous about it all. Like, it's one thing to be wrong, but this was something that Akumu could have easily double-checked in both his own DMs and utilizing those within Senate that were feeding him information. And I know that Akumu did go on to correct that statement. I'm only using it as one such example of the way that he approaches discussion. But it was such a weirdly easy thing to double check, and it shows me, personally, at just how little he actually cared about anything other than trying to win a situation or pitch a particular narrative. The other thing that would tell me that is how he reads into other people's actions and motivations. Within the same video the prior flub-up was seen, we are shown a screenshot of Akumu's DMs with Lio, where Akumu makes the assertion that Nezzy told Toasty to delete the NSFW chat in fear of Benaluni leaking shit. Now, here's an obvious question no one is asking. How does Akumu know this is the reason why? He makes such a claim as if this was definitely the case, but he's only making that assertion off of an assumption. Probably due to circumstances around that time, but not because of anything concrete, as evidenced by the fact that he doesn't show anything concrete. This is why I will frequently call him a bad faith actor, a notion I find he will frequently scoff at the mere idea of. But like, it is important to approach these kinds of things in good faith. It's important that when making accusations that you be open to the idea that these people could just be ignorant, so as to not accidentally make a much more scathing false accusation. A notion that I'll even extend to Lio, as he probably shouldn't have focused so hard on trying to paint Akumu as controlling a narrative without concrete proof either. Like, yeah, after watching some videos over and kinda sitting on the fact Lio did that, I can concede to that being another rather valid point against him. It's important to be able to approach a conversation civilly and respectfully, so as a discussion or debate can actually ensue. You'll find that arguing in good faith can lead to both parties coming to a discussion to properly and honestly talk things out, maybe even come to a mutual understanding. Going and completely disregarding a person's rights, dignity, or autonomy is actually really bad for criticism in most cases, as people will be quick to look at the motivations behind a critic's actions as disingenuous or trying to spin a narrative. Admittedly, I do find that I believe as such with Akumu because he will approach a conflict with a specific end goal in mind and specifically frame an individual in a certain light that reaches that end result. It's confirmation bias through and through, and nobody is questioning that. For other instances of what I mean on Akumu's end, because I don't want to just say this is the case without my own evidence to back it up, I don't want to be a hypocrite after all, so I'll give you a few other examples that I've been able to catch from at least one of his videos about this new situation. I won't be able to go over every video or everything wrong, I mean, I probably could. I have made longer videos, but to be honest, I don't really want to spend the extra time going over all 16 plus hours of content. Y'all have waited long enough for this response already anyway, and I'm not really out here to do some sort of smear campaign against Akumu despite his pushed narrative. I do, however, want to demonstrate my particular concerns with Akumu as a narrator and as a critic, and make my own case on why you should look at what he says with a bit more skepticism and nuance. Starting with...
server, wherein Peaches made a joke about it. Now, there's some context here that needs to be highlighted,
Yeah, what's the
and that's the fact that Peaches was groomed for 7 years. Even at the time...
What the fuck does that have to do with the FCK server? Are you saying the person who groomed her was in the FCK server?
Time this all happened, they were still being manipulated by said groomer. So even if Peaches was 100% aware that there were kids in the server,
What does this have to do with the
personally
FCK
I
server?
doubt, this is something Peaches had normalized by their groomer. Peaches didn't even know any of what that creep was doing was suspicious until Cosmodor got called out later that year. That being said, this isn't something they've repeated and have also disavowed. I think I've made it clear that I'm always going to keep nuance in mind when dealing with stuff like this. If it was Peaches sending porn to children, or speaking to them sexually like Nyx and Jackie, we'd be having a different conversation.
What does Peaches' grooming have to do with the FCK? This is a card that Akumu has also played against me directly when addressing the specific roleplay that has been used as leverage to call me a pedophile, and it's, at best, deflection. See, the important thing to realize is what the effects of grooming actually are, being a normalization to things that otherwise should not be normalized. It makes the victim more open to partaking in sexualized behavior that would not be appropriate for the situation. When Aaron was in the FCK, they were still together with an abusive significant other, someone who I would presume was deliberately sexual and controlling, and this was, according to Lio, going on for multiple years. This would mean that, for years, the act of being sexual around someone who was probably too young to be around that behavior was totally normalized. And Aaron, as the victim of grooming, would not have been able to process the situation that they were in as a bad thing. That's what it has to do with the FCK. And spoilers, that's what mine had to do with the roleplay I did, playing as an 8-year-old. It's almost like behavior is affected by your environment or something, but we'll get more into my story a bit later, as it is slightly different.
Toasty Vanilla was the person in charge of that server and gave no rules or safeguards to protect children in that server. I'd love to see accountability directed towards him, please.
Toasty Vanilla was 18. Peaches was older than he was. ZZ was older than he was. Nezzy Monster was older than he was. Yes, he made the server. Yes, he participated in it. But you and Peaches love to use age on other people to talk about how they should know better because they're older. Yet now you're completely contradicting that and saying that only Toasty should be blamed? Really? Really, Lio?
This is a deliberate strawman from Akumu. Lio is not saying that only Toasty should get heat for the FCK server. He is, however, alluding to the fact that there seems to be less of a focus on Toasty as the one more or less running the place than there is on people like Peaches, ZZ, or Nezzy. We know now, after looking through the logs, that there were people in there that Toasty knew were as young as 12 or 13 years old. Specifically, the 13-year-old was the one that Toasty made all sorts of reverse lolly jokes about, knowing they were so young. That is on Toasty. And while yes, I did earlier allude to being typically more lenient with 18 and 19-year-olds, 1, I specified as long as they weren't hurting people, and given how much I know about the victims of the FCK, Toasty did, and 2, Akumu isn't as lenient. Again, we'll have to come back to this a little later, but the fact that Toasty isn't being given the same treatment as ZZ, Nezzy, or Peaches is worth noting. Like, yeah, Akumu, I'm aware that you've already made a video on Toasty, but you have, like, 4 or 5 videos on Fuchsia, 4 or 5 videos on Nezzy. You have 2 videos on me in this situation, and the first video isn't even really relevant to the FCK situation itself. I'm just saying, if we want consistency in others so badly, then please be consistent yourself. And then there's what he has to say about specifically me.
But a single example may not be enough to convince people of Akumu's smearing attempts being an obvious ploy. So here's another one. Akumu has been regularly spreading an RP Susie did when they were a couple of months past 18. An RP Susie herself did not mix sexual, but the other party did. In doing her research to properly address this yet again, Susie delved into her old logs, and found out she had been groomed.
The problem with this is, and Lio no doubt knows the fucking problem. If he's watched Doodletones' video, he knows the exact problem with this. No one's questioning or denying or even making fun of Susie for having been groomed. But that's the direction they're going with this to shield criticism for the degen roleplay. Doodletones was drawing age regression in diaper shitting art in 2013. They did not meet their groomer, Alex, until the 22nd of November in 2014. So they were already a degenerate before the grooming took place. The roleplay with the character that's described as physically 8 years old was not with their groomer Alex. It was with Kirby. Doodletones has continuously lied and said that they were made uncomfortable by this roleplay, but they returned on an alt account to continue it. Nothing about that is smearing. All of that is true. It would be smearing if the roleplay didn't happen and I photoshopped it. I didn't. It would be smearing if I lied about any of the details I just gave you, but I didn't. You can go watch Susie's video down below.
There is a lot of things to address in this clip. Akumu's understanding of my story is somewhat misconstruing and sumptuous, and the fact people have been running with it baffles me to no end, so let's tackle each of these points individually. Point 1. No one is making fun of the grooming, but that is the direction they're taking it to defend themselves from the degen roleplay. False. I say as I point to your comment that you're being quick to assume that I was going to call people doing so victim blaming told me that you wanted to make fun of the grooming. With that said, I do have to wonder how much Akumu actually cares about the victimization of minors there, when he holds no problem wanting to make fun of me as a victim of grooming by his own words. I have never said that you actually have been making fun of the grooming itself, just that it seemed like you wanted to. Because why would you care so much about how I would react to it if you weren't planning on doing so? I'm also not using the grooming itself to shield from the degen roleplay, because literally within my video I take my lumps there, saying that I should not have been there. I shouldn't have been doing those roleplays. And while I'm actually not going to defend the descriptor or the allowing of it to get that far, that's still on me for not drawing that boundary. I will say that with everything leading up to that point, when you put everything into its proper context and not just keeping it in a vacuum at face value, much like these people tend to do, it becomes less Doodle is a degenerate or worse, a predator, and more Doodle actually didn't know any better. Because I didn't. I didn't have anyone tell me that I shouldn't be there, and I had grown up in an environment where this kind of behavior was encouraged. I shouldn't have done it. I agree there. That is my fault. I was 18, I was legally an adult. I should have tried to be more responsible in my actions. But I did not realize I was doing anything wrong. To say that I think otherwise is being dishonest, if not just a flat-out lie on Akumu's end. I've been told it is a little weird that I have to answer for things that I did as a kid anyways. Much of the stuff Akumu is holding me to predates me even being 17 after all, but I do tend to put the onus on me for being involved in those spaces regardless. I never defended myself doing the roleplays, not in Doodle is Cringe, not in the newest video. I am, however, sick of people taking the time to not be fucking weird about me doing so when it was a decade ago and I was a dumb kid. Furthermore, the notion that people haven't been making light of it is also untrue. I've been kinda holding off on talking about this since I know it would just encourage them to keep doing so, but after my video talking about my history and my grooming, there was an account made specifically to make content off of my old DeviantArt Pro fetish rants. They took my voice, threw it into AI, and generated an AI version of the character I made to represent myself during my grooming, making content to spotlight just how, quote, degenerate I was back in the day.
You're too single-minded, and I never want to RP with you again.
Point 2. They made the diaper art predating the grooming, so they were already a degenerate before the grooming. And I guess who outlined that within my video? Look, the point of my grooming story being within the last third of the video to begin with was to frame a possible further argument of why I was even within these spaces to begin with. Because going even further than that, you might also have the very real argument of Doodle was groomed into it. This was something even Call Me Nil understood. If it took me a decade after being a walking target for freaks to realize I was groomed by Alex, who's to say that it couldn't have happened even prior to Alex? Re-victimization is a thing. Statistically, those who are targets of this kind of behavior are prone to being victims again. And me, being in an environment that was inappropriate for me, with people, adults even, enabling my behavior, it's very possible that I was groomed into it prior. Of course, I may not fully realize that. I don't have evidence for it. Chitango doesn't keep chat logs that far back, and that's why I don't lean on it as an explanation within my video. But that's the thing many people seem to misunderstand about my video in whole anyway. I wasn't using the grooming to explain away the grooming. I brought up the story to show that it happened, and as a possible explanation as to why I was in the position that I was in. It does explain why I was so okay with the idea of playing an 8-year-old, because my groomer put me in a position where playing the role of a little wound up being the only thing that I knew, but I wasn't using the story to disregard being in fetish circles to begin with. It was to reframe the position I was potentially in. This is why the age I was in these spaces matters, by the way, just to get everyone on the same page. I guess, if I were to be fair to Akumu and others, my emotions did get the better of me towards the end of that video, and I do say that people were using my grooming as a weapon against me for like 8 years. I was caught up remembering that this was an allegation I faced from some of Sickly Dad's friends back in 2018, and so I lashed out where I shouldn't have, and maybe that wasn't the play. Perhaps I could have better worded myself, and there is a chance that at the end of that video muddied the waters to the rest of it. And I'll put that on myself if that's the case. It's not exactly the easiest thing to talk about, realizing that you were groomed a decade ago when you were put on the spot like Mad Libs did to me. It didn't help that I only learned of my grooming the same month the video was made, so I can accept that this misunderstanding is my fault. However, that would only excuse Akumu thinking that I was trying to use the grooming to explain the grooming. It does not, however, excuse how he approaches everything else about my story. Point 3. The roleplay in question wasn't with their groomer, it was with a different person, so Doodle has been lying about it this whole time. The fact that Akumu was too caught up in his presumptions to realize that these situations do not have to be one of the same for the grooming to matter shows me that he should never be involved in discussions like this. Ever. He does not know what he's talking about, because the act of grooming coinciding with the actions of the victim would help explain why an individual acts the way that they do. This is also, like he is with Hopeless Peaches, deflecting, because grooming fucks with your mindset and makes you okay with things that aren't okay. We've already touched upon this. Kirby not being my groomer does not mean it no longer counts for anything. Point 4. They claimed they were uncomfortable with the roleplay, but returned to that roleplay under an alt account. This was the part that got complicated the more that I went through this chapter, and is another reason why I'm only going over the one video. This tangent's gonna get kind of long. So this is again something Akumu, or really anyone, can double check. The roleplay is still on my account, you can see the comments. Everything we can see within that roleplay between Kirby and I was on the Doodletones DeviantArt account, not my alt. The last message that I can see that I put into the thread was posted May 4th, 2015. My alt account didn't even exist until May 15th, 11 days after the roleplay supposedly ended. So, unless DeviantArt is deleting or hiding old comments, which is possible, post-Eclipse, DeviantArt has done a lot of stuff that hurt the site, or Akumu is fabricating evidence, since Akumu somehow has a screenshot to prove that I had returned on an alt account, though I haven't any idea as to where that image comes from or how he got it, since as stated before, I can't find it going directly to the source itself. Heck, I even perused through my Kiwi Farms thread to try and find it, and it seemed like no one had it there either, so I am a bit confused on where his source for this is. But you know what? I'll go ahead and lean in on this possibility that I did. Just for the sake of argument and giving the benefit of doubt that maybe I'm just misremembering shit and DeviantArt had muddied my ability to research it. I know I had already established how I was as a kid. I didn't really know how to draw proper boundaries with people. That was something that I talked about in Doodle is Cringe, and this makes sense now considering how commonly enabled I was in these spaces. Plus, given the time frame this happened, as I had learned recently, my groomer wouldn't have helped matters on how I felt about my own discomfort. Because again, that is how grooming works, despite how much Akumu and pals want to claim otherwise. It would therefore make sense were I to come back to the thread on my alt account, because despite my discomfort, this would have been seen as normal to me. Whether or not I was uncomfortable shouldn't come into question just because I kept doing it. Because now we have the context that I was being groomed in tandem with me doing that roleplay, it would make sense that I didn't want to leave the roleplay due to the fact that this was seen as normal. Mind you, this presumes that what Akumu shows us in another one of his videos, where he deliberately disregards what my feelings could have been in that situation, rather explicitly may I add, is even true.
Akumu has been regularly spreading an RP Susie did when they were a couple of months past 18. An RP Susie herself did not make sexual, but the other party did.
This is the same cope that Doodles did in the video. The other person made it sexual, I didn't. And yet Susie was perfectly fine with it being sexual. After Kirby made it sexual, Doodletones continued on with this roleplay. It lasted a month. Susie even came back on an alt account to continue the roleplay.
Yeah, by the way, you're doing a great job beating those victim blaming allegations there, Akumu. It's very Your Honor, if she didn't want to get abused, why did she go back to her abuser of you? I can also approach this from a secondary, less connected direction, but that's still kind of related. Let's talk about compartmentalization, a new word to add to one's lexicon. Psychology today describes compartmentalization as a defense mechanism in which people mentally separate conflicting thoughts, emotions, or experience to avoid the discomfort of contradiction. It's a way some will use to avoid facing cognitive dissonance. This can take the form of something small, like a disagreement about politics that you push aside for a friendship to last, to something as severe as dismissing an addiction so you can have a few more drinks at a bar. In a more domestic setting, a victim of domestic abuse may compartmentalize their own abuse as a mere facet of a relationship and not therein see the problem with returning to an abuser. Now, compartmentalization is not always a negative, however. Sometimes you require the need to put aside a specific conflict in order to approach a different one, so like with most things, there does require some nuance, so it does need to be a case-by-case basis. But when there obviously is something wrong, such be the case with my situation, then that can be indicative of a deeper problem. Regarding my situation, even if we were to put the grooming aside, I've stated before that my use of role-playing was as an escape during a really stressful time in my life. I was struggling with online homeschool, dropped out to get my GED, and all the while was struggling with suicidal ideation and had no healthy way of coping. So my discomfort being put aside in favor of a roleplay to escape those feelings of stress would show that I could have been compartmentalizing it, because the feeling of not being stressed anymore would have felt so much better than whatever discomfort that I was feeling. And no, that's not great. That's not healthy. But if we're really out here disregarding whatever effects me being groomed would have had on me during this time frame, then we could still look at my actions as what it ultimately could have been within a vacuum. You know, deliberate disregard for my discomfort so I could continue avoiding a different unhealthy feeling. Like, this is without question an example of unhealthy escapism, which is detailed by psychologist Richard Nicarsto in The Dark Side of Mental Compartmentalization as escapism that comes at a cost of self and others. When the activity hijacks the rest of your life instead of providing a temporary respite from it, it's time to reassess what you're doing and why. And I just hadn't realized that I was addicted to this stuff until 2020 when I was able to talk about it in hindsight, which is also something I detail as a realization as far back as Doodle is cringe. That said, I could have also done less role-playing, or at the very least chosen a different path of role-playing, because as much as I'd argue this was the most helpful thing that kept me sane during some of the worst years of my life, this was still something that obviously overran my account for a while, and while looking through the pages again after so many years of not browsing through them, I could make the very reasonable argument that this was an addiction that probably was not as healthy of an escape as I thought it was at the time. I will state fully that I do not regret getting into looking at the fetishes I got around to looking at, as this helped me understand and sympathize with people to a certain degree. You're free to try and skewer me for that all you want, but we all grow at different rates and utilizing different methods of learning. Like, believe it or not, I do get uncomfortable with things getting to an explicitly sexual level. I'm not totally adverse to sexual themes, but there's a point where I do get uncomfortable, and having a character just get constantly groped, and maybe even bored if that other screenshot is accurate, would be my own personal limit. And you can kinda see that given how I visibly reply in that roleplay. I kinda don't interact and give very brief, very sparse replies to their actions. And if that doesn't do it for you, I did a very brief review of Bondage Game 2 months before meeting my groomer that would help demonstrate where my boundaries at the time actually were. And it's the explicitly sexual nature that was the turnaway for me. And I quote, "I can get behind fucked up fetishes, but if you find any of this arousing, I'm sorry, but I truly do not want to know your backstory." So I did have boundaries, believe it or not. I just wasn't great at actually telling people where they were. I must have pushed them aside for that roleplay, if not had them downright dwindled due to the grooming Akumu doesn't want to acknowledge could have had an effect on me. Like, he doesn't want to give the benefit of doubt that maybe I could be telling the truth about my comfort levels. Because if he did that, then it puts into question his narrative that I am a dishonest person, that I was a degenerate for whatever purpose that serves. He would rather assert that I have been lying about things because it's easier to argue against if people believe that, which in of itself is not an honest way of approaching this discussion. You don't know how I was feeling during that time frame. I can tell you how I was, and you can choose not to believe me, such as you've been doing since my video had dropped. But to assert that I am lying about it using logic that is already argued via the explanations that have been prior given shows to me at least that Akumu doesn't want to listen to what we have to say, doesn't want to give the benefit of doubt when it could be required to do so, and doesn't want to not be fucking weird about something that, by the way, should not have even mattered to the situation surrounding the FCK they want us to focus so heavily on. My video was made in response to Madlib's heavily implying that I was a predator, not the FCK stuff. And Akumu mere weeks prior was conversing with someone else calling me a predator, pushing the exact same roleplay Madlibs was using. And even in Akumu's defense, he wasn't calling me a predator, just a degenerate, so he should understand why I would address things when I did, especially since I detail that within my video. So the inspiration for this particular iteration of me addressing the things that refused to let me go was Madlib's art, an ex-art commentator who decided to go salted earth when she didn't need to on Twitter, February 23rd, 2024. In this thread, she, very out of nowhere may I add, throws extra shade on me after already saying that I was a bad person for empathetically saying someone else could have merely forgotten a screenshot for a situation that they were involved in, for talking about things that people hold me to from so many years ago, specifically mentioning that I called it diaper shit from 2014. All of this, however, continues to go back and beg the question of why Akumu is so quick to more or less disregard or argue against Toasty Vanilla being held more accountable for their actions. Because he's been focusing so hard on my degen behavior when I was the same age as Toasty and being groomed, or younger in regards to some of my other fetish posting. Like, Toasty was doing worse in both the Fruitcake Club and externally, as they were actively hurting other people, knowingly and willingly enabling minors as young as 12 or 13 in the server, and putting the rest of the adults around them in an awkward position retroactively if they may not have known something was up. Like, all of this focusing on my grooming story ultimately is a nothing burger of a distraction at best, because if all Akumu wants is for me to, quote, agree to being a degenerate, then whatever. Fine. I guess I was a degenerate kid. Like, every time the topic had been brought to me, I've admitted to doing the roleplays. I'm just tired of people ignoring the nuance and how long ago it was to label me as a much worse person, something you both simultaneously do and don't seem to agree with. But, yeah, fine though. If it helps you sleep at night, I was a degenerate kid. Hell, you could maybe call me a degenerate now if that's really what you want to do. If that's the title you want to go with, then fine, whatever. It is a little annoying to deal with it every couple of years, but ultimately it's no skin off my back. Now, what does this actually have to do with my involvement in the FCK? What does my role playing a decade ago have to do with my obliviousness to the situation that I was in 4 years ago? Why don't you focus on the actual victims of the FCK and helping them tell their stories instead of shotgunning at everyone else and literally proving Lio correct and that all you wanted to do was control a narrative? And that is what you're doing, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed you're doing that. All of your TISM report videos have been exactly you spinning a narrative, taking any third-party info you can gather to prime the audience into thinking that we're going to pull all of these supposed manipulation tactics, to run a defense bracket, or to somehow underplay what it is we've actually done in the FCK. And you'll shotgun at anything. You've dismissed all nuance because you don't want the audience to hear that there may be a gray area to consider within this situation, and that your way of presenting things may have faults within them. You label it as pedantic, as unimportant to what it is that you're saying.
Now, allegedly, their responses and its angle is constantly changing because they're scattered and all over the place, frantic even. But the main theme is that it's extremely pedantic in its complaints over the coverage of the FCK, which leads me to believe that, yet again, they'll proclaim that it's being misrepresented, that I'm somehow being disingenuous or dishonest in how I'm speaking about it, that the presentation of the FCK Discord server is somehow dishonest. But, like before, unable to specify what's a lie or false.
You've put someone's harassment into question, claiming that we could be faking it because you think it'll be used for sympathy points.
What I find odd is that Ellie managed to screenshot all of these seemingly at the same time as they were receiving the messages. 850, the first message from Yamamama is 837, 123, as they got a message from the Middleton account, and then the names. Yamamama 336. Philly, Philly, Pilly. Huh. Ellie, Mo, Melly. Melly, Mo, Ellie. You notice that? Bit of a rhyming thing that goes on with Ellie's name. And the usernames also have that same rhyming thing going on there, at least two of them. And the other one is Middleton with Decon Con. So what I'm suspecting is that either A, this is an individual who already knew Ellie and had a grudge with Ellie, and they made these alt accounts to fuck with Ellie because they're upset about the FCK thing, or B, these accounts were made by Ellie or someone else to message Ellie, or, themselves, herself, and say all of this. And again, it's also odd to go after Ellie, of all people, whose name was just mentioned in passing.
You've read so hyper-literally and so uncharitably to things people say so you can further a more aggressive or more extreme allegation, such as you did with Nezzy when you know we've been talking to people who are looking through the FCK behind the scenes.
And on Twitter, she's recently started implying that there's more shit that she knew of in 2020 to do with the FCK that wasn't in the server itself. Bravo, finally some honesty, some transparency here. But this just means that you are implying that you know more, or that you knew more about what was going on, and yet still said nothing. Yet you could condemn others for doing exactly that.
Nezzy and I both learned in the midst of this situation that there was external grooming. We didn't know in 2020. Neither of us could have known. But you're once again asserting something based on minimal knowledge. And just generally, you've painted with this broad brush, pointing out things to look for as if it's a bingo card for credibility. But that doesn't make you a good critic. It doesn't mean that we are predictable. It just means that there are things you don't want to be brought up, that you want to shut out. You are preemptively casting a shadow of a doubt upon us before we even have a chance to respond. And it's especially annoying when you start to assert something is happening behind the scenes without knowing if it's exactly true or not. You claim Nezzy was helping Lio with this video specifically to leverage such a claim, but it's no secret that this situation has been horrible on Nezzy's mental health. We didn't ask them to help, and in turn, they didn't, really. The only help that you could extract from this situation was exporting their DMs with Toasty and then passing them to me to parse through. But you make such an assumption anyway, specifically so you can make a bigger deal about it. These TISM report videos seem to only exist to prime an audience to merely dismiss any and all critique against you if it aligns with your pre-established predictions. Like, you keep alluding to the fact that our responses are going to suck in these videos, claiming that we're just going to run damage control throughout. But if you're so confident in that fact, why would you need to make multiple videos making this claim?
He'll be claiming that I'm bad faith, likely by using my statements in the FCK server, which I've already gone over previously, the fact I didn't like the FCK before all of this, oh gee, I wonder why, or that I'm covering this as much as I am, my constant videos on the subject matter. The problem with that is, I'm not monetized. He can't say I'm milking this for money because I haven't made a penny off of this. My motivation as to why I'm making these videos and pumping them out is purely to get the information others have given me to you all because they want me to tell you all ahead of time because they're disappointed with Lio. This isn't something where it's just me and I want to well poison and not have you listen to Lio's side. I want to hear Lio's side out too. But at the same time, if I'm being told ahead of time and shown ahead of time that Lio does not intend to be honest, those same people showing and telling me these things want me to tell you all ahead of time. And I have no problem with that. Because lying, finger pointing elsewhere with red herring logical fallacy of, oh, they did this, or claiming I'm bad faith is not getting your side out. It's shifting the fucking topic and trying to attack credibility.
I just had to go back and add this upon seeing it, mostly because it keeps becoming a point in these TISM reports. Much of this all starts to ring hollow when you remember Okumu's stated intentions of putting into question what is effectively the ethos of those in the community. Remember, to him, we are all lying, sanctimonious, and dishonest hypocrites, after all. We can't be trusted. We're manipulative and trying to save our own ass. We won't take accountability. We won't fess up to what we've done. And that's the thing that he wants to show the world. That's, by his own admission, what he's focusing on in these TISM report videos. He's merely reporting on our dishonesty so that people know we are dishonest and lying. But like, calling him bad faith or dishonestly presenting information. No, that's totally deflecting from the point. That's just attacking my credibility, guys. It gets really silly when you think about it. Like, he knows credibility is important. If he didn't think as such, why would he focus so hard on it? It almost starts to look like a fear response after a while. Kinda like if you were preemptively putting your guard up, waiting to get punched after hitting someone else first. And I don't know what you'd be afraid of. I've already said that I agree the FCK was inappropriate. If the rest of my criticisms are merely pedantic and negligible, why would you need to fight back against them when clearly the audience would also see that fact? Why would you need to prime the audience to see it? And this is exactly why I claimed you specifically do not care about the victims, something you seem downright offended by the mere notion of.
And because the sheer fucking gall, the testicular fortitude to do what they're doing behind the scenes, and yet want to accuse me of not caring about the fucking victims is rich.
But you making these preemptive defense videos that you were, trying to frame us as merely running damage control when neither of us have really been denying that we did wrong, putting more of a focus and putting more pressure on just about everyone that was even in the vicinity of the FCK, nuance be damned. And nuance is important in this situation because there are more guilty and less guilty parties in this situation, and distracting from that by saying everyone is equally as bad doesn't do the victims justice, because it creates a group that the guilty parties can hide or deflect from. It ultimately distracts from the people who actually abused their victims. It doesn't seem like you want to help the victims get their stories out there, or to hold the actually guilty parties to any form of accountability, as much as you just want to destroy the reputations and credibility of just about everyone who was in a server that did have some bad faith actors towards you. Which, by the way, I am sorry that you had to go through all of that. And I'm also sorry that I labeled it as petty initially. I didn't actually realize how bad it had gotten. Doxing and death threats are never okay, and I had not known that it got that bad until your sympathy bait scheme video, as I was still combing through everything myself. Beyond calling you a transphobe in Mad Libs' video, I didn't think I really did a whole lot to contribute to that, but if I did, I'm also sorry in that regard. Genuinely, witch hunts have never been something that I've supported nor have wanted to contribute to, and seeing that you had genuine harassment thrown your way does feel really shitty. But while I now understand the anger and think it's justified to be angry, the anger doesn't justify the actions or the results, and it still feels like you're more weaponizing the victims of the FCK against those who may have wronged you, instead of actually caring for and assisting the victims themselves. I don't think you're wrong on everything, Akumu. I do think you have some decent points here or there, just like I can think of that with anyone I don't particularly vibe with. I just wish you were more responsible about it all. That's all. One more thing before I wrap up this topic, because I know it'll be brought up, is the accusation that I sent a privacy complaint towards Akumu's video in my roleplay video. The last time I addressed this accusation, I did the mistake of using my copyright history to somehow try and prove a negative. I have now been made very aware that privacy complaints wouldn't be in that section of YouTube, and that's my bad. I genuinely didn't know that because I've never sent a privacy complaint out to anyone. Much less Akumu, who was just doing a video responding to one of my own. And you can choose to believe me or not. A lot of you seem to take the route of, I do not believe a word you say, but let me put it this way. I didn't exactly like it when Zay did it to Akumu with a copyright strike. I'm not about to make the same petty mistake they did. I also have no idea who would have on my behalf, but I also wish they wouldn't have, because I would have known that it would have come back to me regardless, and the last thing that I wanted to do was fuck up being able to address things for myself. And Akumu, I know you also went back and tried to give some leeway to me in your second tweet about it. You leaned on such when one of my fans called you out about the accusation. But your first tweet about it does make the blatant accusation against me. It's literally a tweet away from the leniency one, so just saying, let's not pretend like you didn't also jump to that accusation. Anyway, I hope you've been having a great month, Akumu. Lord knows someone needs to. Moving on. I don't know if I have a ton to say about this subject. I guess we'll see when the runtime is finished, but I don't think I'm going to spend too much time on it. However, good God, this is a behavior that generally needs addressing because it gets ridiculous how consistent the pattern is. In just about every drama, there are these people who will latch on to anything to further muddy the waters, try and get involved for the sensationalization and clicks, or try to swoop in with a grudge to help shotgunning statements at an individual to rile up their audience as the opposition. It happens in every drama without fail, and I know this is probably not the time, given I'm caught on the defensive side of a rather public one. It is a little too on the nose, but I kinda want to talk about why people shouldn't do that, and why it's even worse when an audience joins in without questioning things. Much of what I'll have to say in this section is directly an extension of the stuff Lio had to address in his video, so before you go further into this section, I highly recommend going to watch his video first. My video can wait. It's not gonna go anywhere. Okay, you back? You actually watched Lio's video, or did you just sit here waiting on me to continue? Because, frankly, the latter is hilarious, and you sure got me good, but honestly, I do suggest you go watch his video first. Link down below. Alright, now that you have totally watched his video to see what he has addressed, and won't be going lost further into this section, let's talk. So, a grift, historically, was used to describe a petty or small-scale swindle. They were used to defraud a person or a group after gaining their trust and exploiting a combination of the victim's naivete, compassion, ego, conviction, irresponsibility, and or greed, specifically to gain an upper hand in unequal but voluntary exchanges. This has been able to come in the form of Ponzi schemes, misdirection, or using underhanded and dishonest tactics for personal gain. Usually, when one is called a grifter, it's usually a monetary transaction that they're alluding to, but positions of power and credibility have been gained from grifting in the past, specifically in political debates and internet dramas. A grifter will join in on a situation specifically to gain notoriety, to get subscribers, or to gain credibility, even if they are doing none of the actual work or researching or discussing the topic in question in any meaningful or interesting way. That's at best, mind you. At worst, having these people come in to leech off of every drama can muddy the waters, with people coming in without full context, making statements that are inflammatory and accusatory without evidence, or misinterpreting things people say in bad faith without further asking questions to clear up or clarify what one means when they say something. And in my opinion, these people are worse, because you wind up with an audience who is uninformed, angry, and wanting justice. I have heard over the course of everything that's been happening the past couple of months a lot of these perspectives, from claims of Peaches plagiarizing Illumination's grooming story, to accusations against Zach, Kyle, and I becoming the next of Lio's adopted children. These claims are not really that important when the leading accusations were of abuse and dishonesty, but they've been thrown into the mix because of those who are making the accusations wanting to further stifle the accused's ability to respond. Because if we just keep piling on more unnecessary allegations, then they have to address it all. If they don't, then my accusations remain untouched, and I can look like the more credible source in all of this. I'm merely reporting on the truth of it all. But whether or not these people are shouldn't be predicated on whether or not the accused is responding, especially when all this does is effectively gish gallop the accused. In these situations, it becomes the audience's job to remain skeptical. Listen to the stories you are being told, but verify yourself whether they are accurate or not. For instance, going back to Zach and I being alleged siblings, if you asked either of us how we felt about Lio's found family dynamic as of current, both of us would agree that maybe Lio's success rate is a sign that he shouldn't continue doing so. If not for the sake of those he adopts, then for himself, as this situation shows sometimes those who are helped are ungrateful and will look for an excuse to ruin someone. However, no one wants to ask us, because we're friends with Lio, right? We hadn't gone and publicly disavowed him the minute these allegations came out. We aren't saying anything about the Rosa Ray Ramsey call, so we must be ableists. We aren't saying anything about his abuse of these kids, so he must be abuse apologist. We aren't saying anything about the FCK log, so we must be okay with grooming and inappropriate behavior around minors. Never mind the nuances behind what actually all happened behind the scenes, or what might be able to debunk or further dispel some of the notions that are being created. When I said that I didn't want to make a statement, or wanted to wait to pass judgment until Lio's statement came out, that should have notified you guys that I wanted to remain skeptical, that I was looking at these allegations with a level of scrutiny, which should have also been no surprise when I literally detail my skepticism within my video on Brooke. The more my silence remained, the more it should have told you guys that these things were being looked into, or at the very least, that I wanted to take these allegations very seriously. To rush a creator to put out a response or demand that the accused only apologize without further ability to debunk any faulty narrative shows me that the audience of this particular situation did not take these allegations very seriously. Because if they did, then they would recognize the lack of evidence in these allegations as being a problem, and understand the silence as a sign that things are being listened to and addressed. But the grifters in this situation are absolutely worse, because whereas the audience might not know exactly how to reach out to a creator, the grifters do. They know that there is a chance for an average creator to be relatively trusting when they have allegations thrown at them, so they'd be more accepting, cooperative, and or more open to discussing with them in order to get their own stories out there. But they choose to not even take that chance, specifically so they can make videos laughing at the misfortune, or make videos talking about how both sides are bad, or again to join in to further shotgun allegations that may or may not be true. This can confuse the audience or make the outrage more directionless. And when that happens, statements like, these people are hypocrites because of this unrelated situation, or why did these people not call these things out sooner, may start to pop up. People like Brooke the Dragon Dog running victory laps around the situation because 4 days after my video on her dropped, more allegations followed, was definitely an example of the latter, and anyone who tried to connect the situation to Cloak and Dagger not only shows me that they do not understand Cloak and Dagger, but that they don't even understand the situation that's currently being faced surrounding Lio, the Senate, and the FCK. Another example of this is in regards to the Rosa Ray Ramsey call. People dismiss what Rosa did purely on the backs of how Lio and crew handled it. And let's not get it twisted, that call is insufferably bad. But because of the narrative surrounding it and how muddied everything got with people looking into it with only a quarter of the knowledge regarding what was going on, I have seen people on Twitter insinuate that Senate only thought Rosa did bad things, implying that Rosa did nothing wrong. And while we can have a discussion over whether or not the actions in that call were justified, or when insults and scolding turns into bullying, to say that there wasn't a reason for that call is misinformed at best and downright apathetic of the situation at worst. For more info on that, I'll link to the Mysterious Mr. Enters video on Rebecca Starlight down below as well, as that is directly connected. To some, this might not be enough. Getting angry at Rosa in general is unfair because she's on the spectrum, and, might not be able to understand what to do in a situation where a predator in the room. And, that can be fair. Not everyone will know how to react in every situation, regardless of if they're on the spectrum or not, but I do have to wonder, are we maybe falling dangerously close to infantilization here? I don't know, but it is something to consider regardless. Again, I want to be clear that the way that Rosa was treated was horrible and ableist, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it wasn't. I just want to be cautious that we don't dip too far into the opposite direction, Time frames are also an important factor that have been ignored throughout this situation. Humans never stay stagnant, and so looking at these situations in a vacuum and trying to compare them to when the creators involved are older and or potentially more knowledgeable on things is not fair to the individuals in question, because at that point, why even change or grow at all? Why would we try to get better when people will forever view us as our worst states? It's frustrating being the accused in this scenario because whereas normally people will call out for apologies to be given and accountability to be taken, when they actually are, they're ignored, disregarded, or treated as if these situations just happened a day or so ago. Frankly, were I a more conspiratorial woman, I'd start questioning if that's why Akumu is like he is now. People held him to the Madame stuff for so long after all that maybe he just didn't feel like change mattered in the long run. Would be a pretty tragic plot twist. Still wouldn't excuse the actions in the long run though, but I could at least empathize. I've already discussed at length at this point how many of my old behaviors from when I was a kid haunt me to this very day, and how people treat me as if I'm still lost in those fetish roleplay trenches. But I wouldn't expect anyone else to still be held to their beliefs and actions from when they were a kid. A child isn't going to know better in a lot of regards, and they'll mature as time goes on. At least, that's usually the case. You won't find too many adults still believing in the Tooth Fairy, is all I'm saying. When you're older, however, people expect you to know your shit, be more on the ball. But we all know that isn't exactly the case either. How many of you watching have had a disagreement with an older relative, be it your mom, dad, or grandparents? How many of you have seen the elders of the world pitch ideas that are childish or adolescent? The truth is, older people don't always know their shit either. There is more of an expectation on them to be better, I understand that wholeheartedly, but adults can also learn, grow, and change as their own perspective shifts, especially if they're on the internet now. To show my own age a bit, I'm only 27, and I remember a time in which the casual use of the R slur was more accepted, as it just meant to be silly or foolish. I remember the Black Eyed Peas is what I'm trying to say. But nowadays, obviously, we're more informed, more conscious about our vocabulary. We understand the harm that word, and even that use of the word, has had on people when used in a pejorative way. What was okay back in the day obviously isn't so now, and in some cases it takes time to adjust not using the word and keeping in mind the way that we present ourselves. Lio is one such case of this. He has dropped the word from his vocabulary, as emphasized by the fact that it doesn't pop up in his videos anymore, and he's even acknowledged this to be the case.
On that note, I've also heard the complaints about some of the language we use in these calls. While there are certain words that have been in my vocabulary longer than most of you have been alive, they're genuinely things I'm trying to break the habit of using. But that's only me. I cannot control what others say, so I'm trying to take my time to censor those words for an easier listening experience for all of you. It'll take me more time, and I may miss things here or there considering how long a lot of these calls are, so please be patient with me.
And even if you want to look beyond the use of ableist slurs, because some have been dismissing that fact, the way Lio has shifted his perspective and approached things beyond a certain point has shifted too. After being told that yelling is a trigger for people, he doesn't yell nearly as frequently as he used to. He doesn't just let everyone go at the victim of the call anymore. He tries approaching those on the spectrum in a more civilized and a productive way. And if you want an example of that, honestly, as much as there were problems with that call still, the Raven call is a good example of how much Lio has changed his approach. It might not be perfect, he's still got a ways to go, but there has been visible change. And yeah, maybe he could have prior done a better job at addressing these things. Maybe change could have happened quicker. And maybe he could have made his apologies more well known. Anytime I've asked him about this, he claims he's given apologies, but the victims themselves say otherwise. And given what I mentioned about Aaron and Thuman, at that point it's he said, she said, and Lio should have just made it a more public thing regardless, especially since they were public situations in videos prior. But when change is this observable, personally speaking, I will try to acknowledge it. Personally speaking, I will allow these people to breathe. Because simply put, I understand and know how frustrating it is to never be allowed to change. Nuance is also a dying idea on the internet, and that's becoming more and more a concern as the days go by. The grifters know this and weaponize it to their advantage, painting anyone who brings nuance or a different perspective to the forefront as defenders or deflectors, dismissing what's being said to further push a narrative. It must be black and white. These people must be either totally innocent or totally guilty, and any and all forms to make distinctions or clarifications is met with disdain from both them and their audience. As a direct example, I remember seeing someone tweet out that if Lio does anything other than apologize in his video, then the apology means nothing. But what these people don't realize is that paints what Lio is facing as if it's 100% accurate, which it's not. You are asking him to apologize for things he may not have even done, and then writing off the apologies that he does give because he wants to make that distinction. Or even worse, when there is misunderstandings or a gray area to a situation. Like, if you're calling someone okay with abuse because they thought victory lapping the downfall of an abuser was in poor taste, as an example, then you're not looking at what's actually being said. You're looking at the fact an abuser got their comeuppance and that someone had negative feelings about it. You can criticize the person for speaking without full knowledge of whether or not the person doing victory laps was a victim themselves. You can maybe even criticize the way that the person goes about presenting their critique of victory lapping, but that doesn't mean that the critic is okay with abuse. Like, nuance is so important. It's generally used to gain a greater understanding of minor differences in situations in our beliefs. Human beings are complex, dynamic creatures with complex, diverse beliefs and worldviews, and I know that's easy to forget in a world that encourages more rigid labels and socially tribalistic forms of conflict, but it's more important in today's internet than it's ever been. Nuance is information. It's the communication of how someone's feeling, the ability to critically think about a topic. It's an understanding of one another. Nuance encourages being thoughtful, avoiding premature conclusions based on superficial interpretations. It helps us come to a more comprehensive and precise understanding of ideas. And while that does sometimes require talking to one another and willing to give one another the benefit of doubt, when talking about a situation that requires some retrospective guesswork, it becomes a necessity because otherwise details would be lacking and vague. When we jump to a simplistic viewpoint, we aren't being authentic. We aren't being honest. We are, if anything, being performative because then we have to fit ourselves into a specific, rigid box and then push against anything that falls even remotely outside it. I've been harping on what the nuances of the Fruitcake Club are more or less since I started talking about it in this video, but that's because there is a lot of nuance to it, as much as people like Akumu want to disregard that fact. Even discounting myself and how I was not aware of the ages of the people in the chat, or Nezzy's continual pushback of Toasty's porn posting. You have Ellie Momeli's existence in the chat for a day and could come to a conclusion she probably didn't think much of the situation. Then the Looney's alleged threat to reveal everything about the chat to the public, showing he thought something was up upon his departure. Toby Majestic, who was only in the chat when the known minors weren't. There's a whole slew of possible explanations to the behaviors of the members of that chat, and it doesn't need to excuse them, not at all. But it does help explain things and giving details to further those explanations. After this situation, I don't think I ever want to hear the names Pro-Jared, Spockter, Slazo, or quite ever again. It's not everyone, but a good chunk of the audience of this drama have shown me that nobody really learns from these situations. It takes time to weed through evidence and allegations, especially when there are so many allegations that have to be responded to. You cannot just rely on testimony to dictate your opinions of someone. There could be way more to a situation than meets the eye, which could tell you either that the allegations given are overblown, uncharitably misconstrued, or even downright fabricated, such be the case with Lio's abusive tendencies specifically. And in regards to the FCK, well, I just think the lack of nuance or care is particularly upsetting. Because while, yes, absolutely, people should have been more responsible in that situation, especially those who knew Slimmers was in the chat and knew her age, I think the upset towards that irresponsibility is justified, but we can't keep ignoring the accountability and change in those who have answered for their crimes. We can't keep ignoring how much individuals had done, and we certainly can't keep acting as if everyone is on the same level as one another, as some were merely in the vicinity with others being direct victims. Not everyone is like Ms. Zizi or Toasty, who were active harms, active enablers, and treating everyone as if they are distracts from who was and weren't real problems, and again does not give justice to those who absolutely need it. These thoughts were just kind of written as everything was wrapping up. They're just things that don't really have a place in this video, or just my overall thoughts of the situation as a whole. I've been kind of stepping back and looking at all the other videos in this situation, thinking about their focuses, their goals, their coverage of the situation, and have come to a realization that my video is, at this point, the least important video out of the situation, and I think I'm okay with that. I've been saying links are down below, and they will be added upon as they pop up. Please, please, please watch those other videos. While I don't know everything that will be addressed in all of those videos, everyone who is making a video on the other side of these situations have much more value than I. You know, as someone who isn't, but effectively is, a bystander in much of this. Sure, I've addressed things, I've clarified some of the smaller details, but I've also gone on probably unnecessary tangents, and that last chapter might be seen in bad faith or tasteless, and you know what, if that's how you feel about it, that's fair, that's valid. I'm not the best at actually dealing with situations that involve me. I frequently break under pressure, and pressure there has been, so if this winds up not being my best video, then I'm sorry. I also want to say that I'm sorry for not being as transparent as I try to be in situations. I thought this kind of called for more secrecy than normal, and as much as I had my trust broken left and right during all this, like there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that y'all will probably hear about another time, it still isn't fair on you guys who have been waiting on me to speak to have you be left in the dark for so long. I think, my ire and annoyance to this all aside, there are valid criticisms to be brought up in just everything. Not a single person actually in this situation is blameless, as everyone's got something or another to fix in themselves. Lio does have more cemented apologies to roll out, regardless of if he thought he previously gave them or not. He should give them again, if for no other reason than to just get them out there. I know he's giving quite a few in his video as is, but if there are more that he misses, then please note that it is not out of malice. It could just be because we've all been swamped and buried in things to address on, like, every front. And while I know we don't cover every problem with, say, the Rosa call as the big thing people have an issue with, we do hear you. And if Lio doesn't, I definitely have been with people coming to me about it, despite the fact that I wasn't even in Senate at the time of it happening, which I do think is another thing worth addressing. Y'all have severely overestimated the things that I knew going into this situation. I mentioned it at the beginning of the video that I only started hanging out in there starting this year, and I think it's worth reminding of that here at the end, because quite a few of you have come at me over the, like, Jibs, Jack, and Rosa things as if I was in the room when it happened. I wasn't. I learned about these things when everyone else did. The only event used in this situation that I was there for was Raven, and of course Cloak and Dagger. But as mentioned before, I have my own reservations with the weaponization of those situations against Lio. Those calls do have issues, but they aren't really the same issues as the ones being brought up. Those calls had more issues with overcorrection and lack of experience, respectively. As for me, outside of the fact that I was in the FCK, I really shouldn't have been a main focus of the situation in my opinion, which I guess might sound like, as Akumu put it, the CIA looking into themselves, but Seriously, criticisms of carelessness is one thing. I definitely was. I could have maybe clarified ages of those who were in there when I noted porn was being spammed everywhere instead of just assuming it was 18+. That can be on me. But my Brooke video, my roleplay video, those weren't important to the situation in the slightest. But I know why they were, given the ridiculously poor timing on both of those posts. I was literally out here defending myself or addressing things that were asked of me and then getting absolutely punished for just walking into those mimics. I hope 3 is not a pattern this time. I hope this video goes over better than the last 2 did, but I won't lie and say that I'm not bracing for impact of this video just blowing up in my face again. This is probably the most anxious I have ever been posting a video in my 14 years as a YouTuber. Depending on what I'll do after this situation is done and dusted, and we'll come back to that here at the end, I can help run Utb, be it in Lio's new Senate chat, with Lio himself, or whatever. I ain't trying to be irresponsible or manipulative. Whether you believe that or not, though, I can't decide that for you. Now, before we wrap up, I wish to throw out some sporadic footnotes of things that probably need further addressing. Things that either came out after I was kinda done and dusted, or things that I couldn't quite segue into discussing in the video. You know, just for some last-minute points. To elaborate further on the Ellie Momelli stuff, it's absurd that Akumu stretches to such a conspiratorial assumption based off of the names of those harassing Ellie. Like, heaven forbid we acknowledge Doodletones as an example of someone making an account to harass someone else based on their own name. Like, how many Harley TBS accounts are there? Akumu is basically putting Ellie into a position to prove a negative that she's not behind the accounts. Like, how would you be able to argue against that or prove that to not be the case? On the note of similar account names, the Fur Affinity account that was going around that people were using to claim Lio was a degenerate.
One of our sources have stumbled on one of LioConvoy's accounts on some website similar to that of DeviantArt. This website hosts a variety of degen content and even has a favorite feature, kind of like your own playlist of what you like. And Lio's favorites are something else. This is all alleged, but I do trust my source, and the evidence I'm about to show you is rather compelling. I'll be blurring these images, but don't worry, I'll describe them to you. The first is a photo of a human man sticking his face into the vagina of a fire horse Pokemon.
Is also not inherently Lio. Y'all forget, Lio takes his name from a Transformers character, and he's far from the only Transformers fan out there. Y'all are running off of assumptions based on nothing, shock to no one. Like, people can even share legal names with each other. By now, some people might know that my first and middle name is shared with a pro wrestler, and not a single soul is gonna believe I'm the Heartbreak Kid, come on now. Lio has even pointed out that he shares a name with someone who spread the AIDS virus and is currently doing prison time.
Here's the thing. My name, my legal name, and by the way, I have no problem saying it because I'm okay with that, is Thomas Guerra. I was born in 1985. There is another man by the name of Thomas Guerra, also born in 1985, that is currently doing several years in a federal prison because he is the first person in a very specific state who was convicted for intentionally spreading AIDS. So if I was the person that you had beef with, I'm pretty sure you'd be running around telling people that I gave people AIDS, because I guess reading a court document is too hard for you.
So even he's previously pointed out how this is a bad point. This is another instance of specifically Akumu throwing shit at a wall to make new things to have to address, regardless of how true or not they are, and I'm so fucking tired. Because I couldn't really segue this into the rest of the video, credibility and emotion can be just as important as logic in a debate and discussion, and some people need to remember that. Regarding my FCK spreadsheet, Akumu focuses on the labeled last few messages in there that were claimed to be for Lio, and tries to make the claim that Lio was going to attack him over them. However, that was actually Hateful Eight's idea, not Lio's. What Lio specifically wanted was in the what we are looking for section of the doc. This was again another instance of Akumu making assumptions where the actual events play a bit differently. I wouldn't be focusing so hard on what Akumu has said if he would just stop talking, for real. Some of you need to learn that you can't just trust everyone that is civil to you. And the rest of you frankly can't be trusted yourselves. Alternatively, some of y'all also need to realize that if you're going into someone addressing their allegations with the intent to believe absolutely nothing, then that is also a problem, because why should we even address you or your allegations at all? You have already closed your mind to any and all discussion. The point of acknowledging change in the Lio chapter is, at the end of the day, just my moral compass. Many people after seeing the leak of my video claimed that I'm just making excuses or downplaying what Lio did, but I want to clarify my intentions there. Let me clear the air that I was explaining the reason for Lio's behavior, not to excuse it. A reason is not an excuse, and some of y'all kinda need to learn that fact. You can still not like Lio all you want. Lio came into the predator hunting scene ill-prepared and irresponsible. You can choose not to trust him with a situation, especially going forward. You can still be angry or disappointed about how he's approached X, Y, or Z situation. He's probably even done damage to those who he went at, and especially if he went at them unfairly. He does still have a habit of showboating and puffing out his chest at people, and that on its own, from what I've heard, some people can see as making a mockery of the situation itself. You can make the argument that his constant desire for things to be worked out in Senate especially is him wanting a kangaroo court. There are plenty of reasons I have heard people don't like Lio, and that to me is not the issue. I don't personally agree with all of those reasons, but I have heard them, and y'all are free to believe whatever you want. That said, while I might not be as up in arms about all of these situations as the rest of you are, if I might speak bluntly, I do think the behavior in those calls is disgusting. But with everything there, I personally do not think it is fair to hold him to things that he has visibly changed from, which much of the old calls that were used in the situation, to me, fall under that category. Now, there are things I do think he should be excused from, such as again some of the beliefs he held about people due to Aaron's influence, but that's really it, and even to that extent, you could still not like how he acted upon those beliefs. I know some of the art CC peeps have their hang-ups, and ultimately that's fine. Y'all are victims too. You have a reason to distrust him or to keep your distance. I'm just giving my 2 cents because throughout this situation, it's been asked a lot from me. If you've gotten this far and heard me out the whole way, thank you. I know this video hasn't been the most organized it could be, and I know given how long it's taken to come out, I know much of my goodwill has been severely tested. I just want to make it clear, despite all my long-winded explanations and diatribes, that I don't think of this situation as a clean slate for me. I have fucked up in certain places throughout this situation, be it from getting my wires crossed having discussions, dismissing things where I probably shouldn't, keeping people in the dark and isolating myself, or even as far back as being in the FCK not doing my due diligence to ask and clarify ages or speak out when I had heard Toasty might have been a creep in other chats. I also know there's probably a good chunk of you that, even after hearing my side and thoughts, choosing to disbelieve what I say or my own perspectives and stories, and you know what? I guess that's fine too. I ain't gonna twist your arm about keeping you around, and you're free to just kinda think whatever at the end of the day. But, as I promised, you were getting a statement after Lio released his, and I try not to make promises I don't intend to keep, so I guess let's go ahead and wrap this up. So, I guess the too long didn't watch version of this would be, Lio is not a perfect human, not by a long shot. He has things to apologize for, things to address, things to hold himself accountable for. He's done that by now. However, I do still feel like many of the criticisms against him are overblown, out of context, or unfair, especially those created by Hopeless Beaches and Lumitro, who just wanted to save ass by throwing practically everyone under the bus, regardless of who all that affected. I don't think Nezzy or myself are totally without sin in the FCK situation, but I do feel like there is a lot of nuance to what happened in that chat, and I don't feel like the Fruitcake Leaks or Akumu are being very responsible with their coverage, nor do I feel like they're doing the victims any sense of justice. Wait for Thuman's video and listen to the stories from the victims themselves. Let them take back their stories. I am a bit disappointed in the audience for this situation, but I do understand that much of the issue there could and probably do come somewhat from the grifters who are muddying the water surrounding Lio, Senate, and the FCK. I personally feel like my grooming story was used as misdirection from both sides, and I'm not too fond of that, frankly. Nuance is important, and good God, we do need to relearn that. And all in all, I feel like this situation got too big too quickly, and it's been rather exhausting having to play cleanup crew to help organize and address everything in a timely fashion, despite not even being timely enough when we actually have. I'm not sure what I want to do after all this dust settles and everything has come out. I've been actually kind of heavily considering packing up and leaving everything all together, because God, I am so tired of being stressed with serious situations. That's not what I came into commentaries for, but I'm also not sure if I'll do that. I don't know. I'm ultimately not sure what I'll do after. I make no promises about anything. Regardless, I do hope you watch all of the videos from the defense of this situation, be it LioConvoy's, Zach Not Kyle's, Tujune's, Thuman's. Even though Thuman's not really on the defense in this situation, I just trust her to cover the FCK well. Or even my other video showing the Raven Pine stuff, or whatever other videos that I'm probably going to wind up linking in the description below. The description is going to be updated periodically until all videos are out, and I'll link everything within my community tab too. Anyway, this has been Doodle, and we'll see what happens next, I guess. Either way, have a good day, and take care.